brand is the intangible layer that sits atop any business or product that we end up intuitively feeling, and it floods them with color and emotion and drive. If the only thing that you have is a soundbite, that becomes a really crude tool for dealing with the world as we kind of find it. There's thousands of people coming to work every day and they don't really know what they're doing. They know what they're doing, but they don't know what it adds up to. And there's that absence of meaning. Strategy really is the art of sacrifice. What are all the things you're going to leave behind? Every brand I know that's been incredibly successful is aware of what conventions in this category it's willing to break. There's been a lot of research as to like what makes the most powerful kind of brand comms or communication from people.
So there's two types of comms?
Three types.
Oh,
Rational,
3 types.
Emotional, and then fame. But
so block and quail?
Yes. They had this kind of radical belief that regular homeowners had the capacity to kind of improve their homes. And in that incredibly positive story about people, we kind of saw the kind of future of the business.
Interesting. Yeah, I think there's like definitely a bias into figuring out what doesn't work versus what does work. I think there's a whole thing of like just avoid dumb things and you'll be successful. I think people are all constantly trying to like find this massive innovative thing.
But I also think some of the most powerful people are the people who are like really just ambitious but dissatisfied with where they're at the moment. So you look at these people, and so they're the people who are kind of speaking up. They're like, well, I want to get there, but like, how do I get over this specific problem? As opposed to people who are just a bit more kind of comfortable with the status quo.
I've interviewed a really interesting guy called James Smith, he's now got a brand called New Tonic. It's like I think they're the first influencer brand that's actually going to crack it. Like they've got Chris Williams got a massive podcast called Modern Wisdom. You know that guy. And he's been on the show, James, and he was saying that you've got to look at your work and be a bit fucking pissed off. Yeah. Because that's the only thing that makes it better. You've got to have this. There's a great irony when you look at your work and you're just like, I don't like that. It actually produces really positive and incrementally better results. Yeah. But then there's kind of that the creative disposition of being a bit like, the whole time. It's interesting. I interviewed John Hegarty and he said to me, he goes, if you want to be creative, don't go to a sunny country. And I said, why is that? He goes, because you need to be a bit pissed off. Yeah. If everything's rosy and you've got you're having a cocktail on a beach. Yeah. You need to like be a bit...
I've worked in both markets and I think creativity
have you been in... Sorry to interrupt, but you've been in Sydney where it's boiling.
Yeah.
And then London. Which one's more creative, would you say?
I think creatively works very different in both places. I think creativity in places like London, it's more of a rebellion, like it's a fight against something. It's like a reaction against it, as opposed to in Australia, it's more like part of the tapestry. And I think he's right in the sense of like it's really good when creative like exists as a reaction against something. Yeah. I think like the best British creativity is a reaction against something. Like, you know, not to be too hack about it, but like Sex Pistols, Beatles, like these kind of like things that arrived in reaction to something and kind of took over the world. I think that's just such a more powerful place for stuff to be. You know what I mean? Like it's way more catalytic, you know, like maybe we can talk a little bit about this later, but you know, we talk a lot about the kind of power of having an enemy. There's a stat that I quote, which might be completely made up.
We're rolling, by the way. Yeah.
Oh, okay, right.
Yeah. We're just we're always just roll. Yeah, go on. Yeah, fuck yeah, go on, mate. Yeah.
All right. Well, you'll have a rough onboarding. Okay, cool. Yeah, just like this kind of like need to have an enemy. Like actually, if you know, marathon runners run faster when they're rivals in the race than they do if it's not there. Like there is something deeply, deeply motivating about having something that you're working against.
Yeah, and then you said with Oz, it's sort of woven into the tapestry, the creativity.
Yeah, I just think it feels more like you're kind of adding to the layer. You know what I mean? Like this is not a particularly eloquent point, but like there is just, I get the point that like when creativity exists to kind of move the status quo, be a reaction against something, it has a little bit of firepower to it. Yeah. But in Australia, I don't know if that same agenda exists within the creative market.
Interesting. Yeah, because I think obviously that there's a broad brushstroke question, but I also think the other thing, quite literally, when the weather's bad, and I noticed this over the summer, I was saying this to mate, when the sun's out, I want to go to the pub and get closed up. Like whether it's a Wednesday, a Tuesday, or a Thursday, but when the weather's shit, it's like, what else am I going to do? Yeah. Like it forces you inwards, and I think that's really important with creativity. I mean, I've talked about it a lot, like the bands up in Manchester. Why is the weather's, I went to uni there, the weather's woeful. It's like constantly grey, but you get this aggressive, and I think, you know, music and brands, they're all part of the same, blossom from the same space, right? It's like they had that about them, and they also like. I think as much as it's about having someone to go against, there's this idea someone told it to me the other day called competition. So it's like you're against someone, but also because it's the boats rise with the tide. You know what I mean? Super interesting. But look, just for context for listeners, so would love to know, and we're going to get into some of the way you think about brand, the way you think about brand strategy. I think also what I'd love to get into is how brands can, one, exist in culture, but also like see culture and forge their own path. Zig whenever everyone zags. But yeah, for context, Amelia, Christy Miller, my really good friend, you're now good friend as well, text me saying, look, you've got to speak to Toby on the poddy. And you guys would get on really well about all brand strategy. So super excited to explore that. I think beforehand, just to give some context for listeners, like what was the first brand you sort of fell in love with and why?
I think growing up, I loved so many brands. I loved Nike. I loved Apple. I loved, there was kind of brands in our fridge that I loved. I loved what Coke was doing. More than brands specifically I loved the dimension of business that was brand. That kind of more emotive feeling layer, felt more imaginative, that just sat across, like the magic that just kind of sat with a handful of brands. I didn't really know brand strategy existed, but growing up I was just really passionate about brands. I had a strong opinion on what sneakers were better than others, what jeans were better than others, and many of those brands have completely disappeared, but like I really remember like brand being this kind of important navigational point for me. I was like, why do I like certain record labels and not others? Why do I like certain clubs and not others? Why do I like certain jean brands and not others? And then I came to realize that it's this dimension called brand, which is where the story, the feeling, the narrative resided. I just was so drawn to that. And if this question kind of goes on to like, so how did I kind of go from there into making a career of it? I just kind of always had a bit of a crush on that area and pointed my kind of career at it as best I could. Landed in an advertising agency in Sydney, had a very, very strong brand strategy department. That's why I discovered there was like people paid to kind of sit and think and invent that layer of business and kind of really conceptualize it and kind of really plan out how to make it happen. And, I've been kind of doing it ever since. Sick.
I think what I'd love to understand before we jump into some of the points is what would you say your definition of a brand is in a sentence? And then what is brand strategy? And again, I ask a lot of dumb questions, but I think it's important because the smart answer lies in the dumb question.
I wish I was a dumb question. I wish I had a smart answer. I think brand is the intangible layer that sits atop any business or product that we end up intuitively feeling, and it floods them with color and emotion and drive. And that for me is what brand is, that intangible layer that really resides in people's hearts and minds about a brand. The way people talk about these products and brands in a way that completely exceeds anything that's related to the business or the product in a tangible sense. That for me is what brand's about. And brand strategy really is a discipline that exists because if you believe that that's powerful, then you actually want to spend some time seriously thinking about what you want that layer to mean, what you want it to happen, what you have permission to kind of build into that layer and how you cultivate it over time. Because it is incredibly valuable, but it's also precious. You can fuck it up really easily. So if you're not paying attention to it and if you're not being intentional about it, you can get it completely wrong. And that's why we kind of walk around supermarkets or streets and just feel certain ways about some brands and completely cold about others.
How would you architect that feeling though, from your side? So again, say you were to write a brand strategy, what are the one on a piece of paper? Is it on a piece of paper? I've sat up at some people and say like, you should write it as a piece of prose. I've had other people say you should put a fucking vision board up. What's your perspective of say you're creating a brand, what are the 1, 2, 3 things you put in that brand strategy?
Yeah, well, I think, there's kind of 2 layers to that question. There's a very specific question around what's a good output of a brand strategy. And then there's what are the right ingredients? What separates the good from the bad? So if we talk about ingredients, I actually kind of advocating for like a far more ambitious, audacious view of brand strategy than maybe some places are willing to play at the moment.
Cool.
And the areas that we think are really interesting start fundamentally with a very, audacious and, I'd say kind of almost, very positive belief around what brands can be. Like we have quite a lot of audacity around brands. And specifically what we think is that brands should actively try and claim a role in culture, not just a position in their category. And, the ingredient, the way to get there is starting to ask questions around what the hell's going on in the world. What are the kind of problems at play, and where might we be able to place this brand to have that kind of impact? Then in terms of what like a great output could look like, all of the above. I think some organizations gravitate towards a very technical framework. That's what speaks to them. Some gravitate towards a long period of prose. But I think at the end of the day, what all brand strategy should have is a really elegant single sentence that can clearly articulate why that brand deserves to exist in a way that feels believable, compelling, true, possible. And that kind of short sentence should be something that everyone in an organization is able to kind of recite, basically.
Interesting. And the part about the different ingredients that feed into that, and because what did you say? A brand shouldn't have a place in a category; it should infiltrate culture. Is that what you said? The culture bit, like I don't, because I listen to a lot of like podcasts and a lot of these big CMOs and stuff. They're like, a brand's got to like infiltrate culture.
Yeah.
How do you think about that? And
should I break this down a little bit? Because it's something I've been thinking a lot about, which is
because it's in the zeitgeist. People talk about this, and it's like, but I'd love to get your take on it. Yeah,
brand strategy has been going on for over half a century. Really robust debates around how you should build a brand strategy. So I think it's important to put stuff into somewhat of a historical context.
Yeah. So take me back to the beginning.
One of the really early moves in brand strategy, not the first, but a really important point, was this idea that brand strategy, that single sentence, ultimately should articulate a positioning. And it was called a positioning because that's quite an evocative word that describes exactly what you were trying to do. If you were going to launch a product, you needed to talk about how it positioned against the other brands in its category. So if you had a tin of soup, for example, or a new cereal, the idea of positioning was, well, help me mentally map how you're different to the rest of the brands in the category. And positioning really asks brands to think about what's their point of difference, what's their USP, what makes them slightly better or slightly different to their competitors. And that was a really, really powerful and sensible kind of framework. It makes intuitive sense, right? Tell me why you're slightly better. Tell me why you are launching this brand into a category and why this category needs you. And then a bunch of stuff happened. I think people started to kind of become much more brand savvy and start to kind of interpret brands much quicker, which created this bullshit filter that meant like kind of positionings that were a little bit made up kind of fell away. I think we also had a very shifting media landscape, which meant that 50 years earlier, in a very TV-centric marketing model, if you had a positioning, you had this soundbite you could go on TV once a night for a couple of weeks and say, and people would land and get it. Now, if you think about the media landscape, well, we're not just seeing you on TV, we're not just seeing you in store, you're in our feeds all the time, you're in PR, the world is happening to you and brands are expected to react to it in some sort of way. So if the only thing that you have is a soundbite, we have, 30% less sugar, we come with a toy or whatever it might be, that becomes a really kind of crude tool for dealing with the world as we kind of find it. So there was a media shift that happened as well, not only this brand savviness. And so where the world started to move was this kind of question of purpose. Actually, brands don't just need to have their position in their kind of culture, in their shelf. They need to have this kind of place within culture. And so this kind of philosophy of purpose came along, and everyone got really, really excited by purpose. Now,
what year is that? Just rough,
I think it probably started with Dove Real Beauty, and that's probably over a decade old now.
Cool.
Right. But I actually think we're now entering a phase of Purpose 2.0 because we've actually kind of seen purpose play out, and we've learned a lot about it. That actually when your brand's kind of reason for existence is completely untethered to your product and is only really lived in the marketing, people also don't really connect with those brands. Those brands don't seem to be firing in the same way. So when you ask me, what do I think a great brand strategy looks like now, it's probably this new version of purpose,
right,
which is incredibly aware of the world, incredibly aware of the consumer, incredibly aware of the role that the brand can play at that intersection, but without ever overstretching. I think we've kind of had this era of kind of water bottles trying to solve world peace, or a dog food brand trying to solve world hunger, or whatever it might be. Those kind of overreaches probably weren't quite quite working. But we still need brands that kind of understand what's going on in the consumer's life and want to play an active role. And that's what I kind of think of when I think of Purpose 2.0.
Fuck boring workshops. Introducing Hungary's 10x Challenger Brand Workshops. 10x creativity beats 10x budgets. Bringing the poddy from your headphones to real-life rich learning. They're absolutely banging. I've chinwagged with some of the best Challenger brands in the world. Innocent, Vita Coco, Tony's Chocolonely, Bold Bean, Brewdog, and Bear More. And some of the greatest marketing minds in the world. Seth Godin, Rory Sutherland, Sir John Hegarty, the absolute Donnies. My boy James Hicks and I have created 3 absolutely banging workshops. The best storyteller wins a banging copywriting workshop. 10x and unleash your creative inner being. New business Donnies using creativity to absolutely sell and close new business. We've run these for Naked Wines, Vita Coco, and Corson Press. They all absolutely loved it. Each workshop is littered with a luscious mix of hand-picked, delectable and delicious goods, pastries, croissants, and loads more. You'll feel like a pampered guest at Hungry Hotel of Creativity. If you're interested and you're interested for your team, please DM me on LinkedIn or Instagram. Go more into Purpose 2.0. So when you say, because I think on that wonderful presentation, you said people are trying to fix brands or fix their brand when actually they should fix a problem and that will fix the brand. Like, talk to me, detail that to me.
The question is like, okay, cool. You kind of see a role for purpose, but you think there's some overreaches. How the hell do you solve that? And it came back to a really simple question, which is actually what brands really need to be asking themselves is what problem in the world that they fix. And I want to break that down a little bit so it doesn't kind of run away. I think brand strategy can be built by asking 3 questions.
Yep.
Firstly, what are the resources of the brand? And this is a question that I don't think many marketing functions or brand owners necessarily ask themselves because they don't see it as in their purview. They kind of go, I've got a marketing budget, I can't think about it. But I actually think the first thing a brand owner should do is look at the resources of the brand. And the resources of the brand aren't just the marketing budget. It's also the factories. It's the product. It's the community that sits around it. These are the resources that the brand has. The next thing to do, having kind of assembled that kind of army, is to look at the world and say, well, what is the most kind of meaningful problem we could throw this at without overreaching? So where could these resources really make a difference? And of course, we don't want to kind of overreach and kind of go, like I said, like we've all had like peanut butter brands trying to solve world peace, but kind of go, where is a tension in the lives of the people we're trying to sell to that we might be able to play? And when you find that overlap, there's a really powerful place for a brand to have a really active role in culture and kind of move the dial forward. You kind of having the best of kind of purpose, which is a really active, modern way of seeing a brand, but actually connecting with what's going on with consumers.
So interesting. So first question is understanding what your resources are. I find that fascinating. And then the second is like, where's the problem? I suppose and I've got mates who've set up brands, like I speak to these brands, is sometimes should they be asking one question, solving one problem? Because sometimes there's a buffet of problems to solve, and you're like, oh, solve a bit of that, and then you get kind of a diluted and tepid brand. So how do you analyze the culture, you analyze your resources, how do you pick the problem?
Yeah. Well, it's so funny because I work with 2 types of brands. I work with really, really big brands who often kind of are needing to find something to say. And I work up with startups who often have too much to say. So the idea of, oh my God, we've got so many problems. I think so many people founding a brand do that. They're incredibly ambitious people, incredibly audacious. So of course they kind of go, here are 4 or 5 things I think we could meaningfully do. It is worth zooming into that question though, because actually there's lots of problems you could throw the brand's resources at. I think
any examples as well to bring.
Yeah. Well, maybe we should dive into Bold Bean after this and talk a little bit about the journey we went on with them, because I think it's so super interesting. But I actually think the question really is, what problem is really real and present in the life of your consumer? Now, that's very different to a problem that might interest them. So I think everyone has a broad interest with food safety, the environment. But actually, for some consumers, that's not necessarily present in their day. I think you've got to look at their real life concerns and ask them what is actually going on in their real life that you can kind of solve. And I think that starts to filter it down. I think there's a real difference between problems that interest consumers, things that are on the periphery that absolutely matter to them, versus problems that impact consumers, stuff that's affecting their day-to-day life.
Go more into the impact versus interest.
Yeah. So again, and I don't want to sound flippant with some really significant issues, but these significant issues I think are rarely the kind of purview of brands. Like, sometimes brands are just completely inappropriate playing in these spaces. So yeah, like issues like world hunger, for example, or peace, or things like this, very kind of substantive and important issues. What becomes really challenging, I think, for brands is actually the resources that they've, sorry, take one step back to your question. You'll find in most target consumer groups that those things are of massive interest. Of course they are. They're massively important. But then you look at the resources you've assembled and you've asked yourself, well, are we going to make a dent there? And more importantly, is it going to allow us to make a connection with this consumer group that we absolutely need to reach? Or are we just going to interest and entertain them?
How do you do that with Boldbean then?
So I think, Boldbean's a really interesting example of a founding story actually with like multiple angles at the start. So when Amelia was kind of sketching and building out Boldbean and she would hope, I think she would have her version of this story. But as I recount it, early on there was multiple things that the brand was pointed at, because actually in Bean she'd kind of stumbled across this kind of superfood. And I use that in the broadest sense of the term, right? Like something that was kind of, she would talk a lot about the ability to kind of solve farming issues and issues with soil. Massive issue. She would talk about the kind of movement away from meat, or at least a need to move society away from meat. And would talk a lot about actually the fact that this kind of ingredient, most people were kind of overlooking it because, it just broadly been presented them in a really shit way. I want to break down those three problems to maybe make the point I was making a little bit clearer before. A powerful brand will have a reason to interact and add to the lives of a consumer every single day. In everything it does, it will have a reason that it can kind of connect and advocate and add value to the lives of consumers. I think when you go to soil, for starters, like you and I probably would both agree. Is
that the sort of the first thing that if someone listens, it's like a brand should add value, and do you say an excitement or?
It should find a way to interface with the consumer every day.
Yes.
It should have a point of view on the life of its consumer and what problems that consumer faces that it can resolve. Yeah. And I think so much conversation around purpose has encouraged us to think really, really big that we sometimes become out of touch. So let me step through those three examples, right? Soil, for starters. I think you and I would both agree that's massively important. Yep. But then we kind of went on this kind of projective exercise. Okay, how am I going to engage you every single day in a Instagram feed, in our newsletter, in, talking on podcasts, if I'm talking about dirt? Absolutely, that's massively important, but it's really hard to have a really personal connection day in and day out, because that's something over to the side of my life. It's not something really driving my day to day. The next thing was this kind of need for society to move away from meat.
Yep.
Again, it's just quite a tricky place to start a relationship, right? Which is I'm going to try and coach you out of something you want to do through my point of view. Like what that relationship...
Quite coercive, yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then the last one was this kind of sense of there is a foodie culture in this country that's kind of phenomenal, and a real appetite for home cooking and making stuff from scratch and feeling like you're, have a bit of a foodie kind of element to you. And that was actually something that the brand's resources could really aid. It was a far better ingredient. It was started by kind of, Amelia has kind of a background in food and chefs and knows that industry incredibly well.
When you're talking about her background, that's a resource.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Interesting, because you originally said like a lot of people forget about the resource thing. Because as you say, if you go on this big, as you say, the bigger problem could be the soil thing.
Yeah.
But actually, it's like, what resources have we got? Well, Amelia's connected to the chefs.
Yep.
The chefs are the ones who can be the evangelists.
Yeah.
The chefs are the ones who she's already got the links in with, who can promote the cookbook on there.
Exactly.
Wow. Okay, so it's like, what resources have we got? What are the three what problems can we solve in the world? And then I suppose the next step, asking which ones actually aligns with our resources, or what?
Yeah.
How do you?
Well, this is where people kind of look for an equation in brand strategy and kind of go, wouldn't it be come on, what's the algorithm here? I've got my resources, I've got my problems. Give me the answer. And there is a need just to kind of do that kind of magic matchmaking stuff, which is why I love this job. While so many people in the brand space love their jobs, but it's also why it drives people like CFOs and certain kind of ops people nuts, right? That's just the tension of brand building. But, you can start to kind of see how in the analysis, it's like, okay, look, and by the way, that brand today continues to be a massive force in farming. What they have done for farmland and for soil regeneration by simply having a successful business like they do is insane. That remains part of it. They have, I think, dragged lots of people out of meat consumption to bean consumption through their foodie strategy. So it's not to say those were ignored. But when we talked about the way the brand was going to deal with people and interact with people, we thought we could talk to them about something people think are important, but actually is quite a hard place for day-to-day relevance, soil. We could talk to them about the need to kind of eat less meat to save the planet, which again is valuable, but again, a tricky place to start a relationship. Or we could talk about the shared passion, which is foodiness, and kind of find the shared love of like foodiness and restaurants and, cooking and recipes and inventiveness, and use that shared passion point. And that is just such a stronger place to start the foundation. We've got this incredible product that actually makes it way easier to cook at home, immediately makes meals better. It's much more fun to play with than a jar of kind of really overly cooked beans. We've got this incredible product. Like that just feels like such a more powerful place to start in. And the fix then isn't ginormous. It's not as seductive as saying this is a brand that exists to create world peace. That's a really seductive mission. Their mission is far smaller, about kind of creating an obsession around beans via kind of being a brand obsessed with like foodie credentials. It's a smaller mission, but it's just so much more appropriate for the brand. And because it has this like very deep connection with consumers and people actually care about it, and it starts to resolve some of the frictions in their life, the brand's going flown.
There's almost like a massive irony. It was like the bigger the more sort of salacious the big save the world strategy is, the less impactful it is. Whereas actually, if you sort of flip on the end, it's like, what's the micro strategy that over time will actually have a bigger impact? Because as you say, if we get more people obsessed with beans through foodies, through chefs, then actually, ironically, you're going to solve. Well, not ironically, happily, you're going to solve the soil situation and the meat consumption situation.
Exactly. And this is where you shift, that's the difference between being a phenomenal brand and a phenomenal business. Like that stuff is really important to the business. It aligns
What's
with
the difference between a business and a brand?
Well, the business is the operations, at how you deliver the product and how you create the brand and how that gets to market. You could imagine, there's the brand layer, but there's so much more going on behind the scenes. How you treat your workforce, how you treat your suppliers, how you do business, the values of it, that still can be operated, and continues to do really good and powerful things because it's a really phenomenal business. But the brand strategy focus needs to be far more singular and in my case, kind of far more pointed at the lives of consumers.
So I interviewed, actually the episode went out like a couple of weeks ago, with Seth Godin, all about strategy.
Yes.
A great book called On
Yes,
Strategy.
how it's fallen for you.
Yeah. No.
You've gone from one of the goats to this little room.
No. It's just,
I can attest the podcast's still going well. There's going to be some people listening who kind of go, oh my goodness. After Seth, I saw that and then I put my phone away. I thought, this is far too intimidating. I was told this was like a foodie podcast that I was, and I was like, oh my God. But
it's as you say, you start mapping everything out across all these different big marketing people I've spoken to. It's fascinating, and it's like, John Hegarty said to me, a brand is the most valuable piece of real estate in the world. ... The cornerstone of someone's mind. And as you said, linking to your stuff, mate, all about like the intangible layer, that bit that goes over the top that actually has a point of view. And it's like, how can you be? If you're looking at Amelia's point of view, the only way you can really be with bold being a cornerstone in someone's mind out of those three options: soil, eating less meat, or foodie bean, making you obsessed with beans by giving the best of beans. Like that suddenly becomes the most salient option to pick, and you've got the resources and you push that forward. But anyway, so sorry, Seth was saying to me that strategy is upstream from tactics. And essentially, the more you do strategy, the better it gets. The more you do tactics, some tactics like price promotion, the worse they get. What's your where do you sit on that with the strategy and the tactics? We can either use Bold Bean and or another brand, like that interplay, because I've seen it whereby a lot of people are using tactics and thinking it's a strategy. And it kind of links to this point of like, we'll give you a free extra coffee. That's not a position or a point of difference or a purpose 2.0 in the world. That's just a tactic. Or like, we're investing 1% of our profits to fucking whatever, but well, you ain't making any profit, mate. So like, it's kind of the great irony, isn't it? But, like, where would you sit on that?
Oh, it's so interesting. Look, I heard that and I thought it was really kind of profound. I think it speaks to businesses that probably are finding themselves in a really bad place, if I can be candid.
Yep.
If you find there is a hard delineation in your businesses between strategy and tactics, and you're trying to upweight one and downweight the other, that is a bit of a crisis point, I would say. And the reason why is because the value of strategy is its ability to kind of simplify and clarify decision-making around every single tactic. So in a really highly, or a very powerful organization, at least from my view as a brand guy, there's a really clear sense of what the brand's about. They've done that hard fight of kind of going, this is the tension that we resolve in our consumers' lives. We're super clear on it. We've bought into it. We've left other stuff on the table at the cost of this because we bought in so much. And now every tactic we do has to be able to be connected to that mission.
Yes, that's what he says, yes.
And I don't want that to be read as, okay, well, then we're only doing big, cool, sexy stuff. A promotion can achieve a mission. You know, when I see Bold Bean go on sale and I think of their mission to welcome more people into the world of brands, into the world of beans and make more people obsessed with beans, I'm like, well, that tactic perfectly aids that mission because actually creating a lower cost entry point for a certain amount of time lives up to the mission. And when I see them kind of innovating around a recipe book, I also see them living that mission. So if you're in a situation where tactics and strategy feel like they're in opposition, that's really, really tricky because if there's no tactics attached to a strategy, it's never going to happen.
Are there any brand examples that have done that, maybe big brands, not necessarily that you've worked with, but any brands that have gone where the strategy has sort of swam away from the tactics?
Oh, heaps. I think there's lots of organizations where brand isn't firmly rooted in the operational system of a business. I wouldn't want to kind of name any and not, because that's not particularly fair, but there are a handful of brands who put.
Or it could be a brand like years ago, not like currently.
Yeah.
So like, probably the CMOs have passed away. Like, but in the history of advertising and stuff.
Look, I think you could think of something like insurance. Like insurance is, people kind of think about it in an incredibly rational way. We just need to make sure we guarantee it. I think people could think about, it's only about price. People never really going to understand these policies. And so, the key levers, and I'm thinking kind of a few decades ago for the insurance category were, price effectively, and some kind of commitment to safety. And then I think there's been this kind of great breakthrough where people have been far more playful and made jokes about kind of what goes on and
interesting.
And I think they've kind of gone, oh God, like this whole category has left the lever of brand on the table. We're going to kind of embrace that.
Brands like I suppose in banking, like Monzo coming into the
100%.
Market, Revolut.
100%.
Interesting. And there was another thing that again, John said. There's a great book about marketing air, and what it means is like a lot of the services we're buying now are stuff that is actually literally air, like Vodafone, mobile services, broadband, and it's like an interesting, but it's like that, and that shows the intangibility of, as you say, the intangibility of a brand because we are literally flogging air.
What a great
or maybe it might be oxygen or air. I what you said. Yeah,
but what a great example. The way that people can feel so differently about Three or Vodafone and BT. I think that's the thing that always made me so interested in this dimension of brand. I was like, oh, right, people sit around and come up with what they want their feeling to be.
Yeah.
And they have a point of view on why feeling a certain way about air is going to be more valuable than feeling another way about air. I was like, what a brilliantly kind of creative and ambitious and like new space to kind of play. I just thought it was badass.
That's sick. What are some of your sort of with that swimming down that lane in terms of the most proud work you've done in terms of creating that feeling out of nothing? And like, how did you specifically get me into the weeds? Like how you planned, plotted, pontificated, and got the fucking moving.
Yeah. Well, look, there's been tons of stuff. Let me think of a good example. Look, well, this place works with like this incredible array of brands from British Airways to Instagram to The Ordinary to startups like Bold Bean. So we get to work across this incredible spread of clients, and all of them, approach brand in a similar way to what we're talking, albeit to very, very different ends. One brand that we've been on a really fascinating journey with is The Ordinary. I think the skincare brand. They were this kind of powerhouse, really, this kind of incredibly inventive and disruptive brand, right? That had this kind of point of view that people were just paying for so much guff in that category. You know what I mean? Like
category guff's a great word.
Oh my God! Like
that could be a podcast in of itself.
we're talking a little bit about having a gripe, how like a problem can make you go further. You know, this kind of sense of like, actually, the real heroes of the skincare category are the ingredients. But let's think about all the stuff that like that category's put around skincare, celebrity endorsement, the crazy names, the insane packaging. It was like a complete distraction from what the real hero was. And that frustration that kind of grew Ordinary was really, really powerful. That brand's been this incredible success over the last kind of decade, but was looking to scale. And I'm just really kind of proud of the very interesting ways that we've kind of helped that brand capture that magic. You know, I talked a little bit before how sometimes your job is to kind of create something, you know, help a brand find it. I think in the Ordinary's case, it was very much about channeling something that really existed there.
And what was hard to be, because that's another point with this, is sometimes it's channel something that's already existed. Is sometimes it's like looking internally into a brand or like as a leader, as a founder, and you can get so distracted by the panoply of different options that you could pursue that it kind of blinds you from seeing the very thing you keep the main thing. Like, what was the challenge with that?
And look, we've talked a lot about how brand strategies out there, right?
Yeah.
What's going on in your consumer's life? What is going on in culture that you might be able to fix? But actually that first question around what resources, and we talked a little bit about how a founder's energy is probably one of the big resources. It means that actually the first thing the brands really need to do is turn inwards.
Yes.
You know, the best brand strategy, particularly for established brands, is kind of archaeology versus creative invention. So the job really isn't to sit around and kind of go, oh my God, wouldn't it be cool if the brand could do this? Because brands really can't outrun their origin story. You know, fundamentally, in the walls of an organization is a sense of what that brand's about. And as fantastic as it would be able to move a brand to a certain area or to chase a certain trend, fundamentally brands start for a certain reason.
Yes.
I think, you know, think about yourself. Like this empire, this media empire will grow to a certain level at some point, you know, and you'll kind of go, oh my God, could we go into this or could we move into this? What you'll find is you'll have to go back to the initial idea around what this brand was started to do.
Yeah. As I said to you, so I get these inbound opportunities now. So the other week, my mate's like, I've got a site in Shoreditch by where Box Park used to be. Yeah. He was like, do you want to do a hungry food festival? Yeah. I get like excited like a little kid. Run down there. Next thing I've got fucking hard hat on. Next thing I know, I'm in Shoreditch House having an ADHD orgy meeting. No one's taking notes. I'm like, yeah, we could do a Thailand. Yeah. We could do a whole fucking Thailand thing. So one day it's Thailand. Then we could do a pizza fest. Then we could do like a different, almost like a series. Yeah. And then I was just sort of gone like, what are we doing here? What is the reason we're here? I mean, I'm maybe kind of going through that now. It's where I really believe like, you know, distractions masquerade as opportunities, and it's trying to. You get to a point where you get bombarded in sort of like a tornado or avalanche of inbound stuff that you can't work out what you're doing, and it's one of the things I've decided to do is just. Do you know the brand Purdy and Fig? Mm-hmm. Yeah, Ruben's a really good mate of mine. He literally ripped. Like we used to get on it and stuff and party when we were at uni together, and. We used to talk about business ideas and all this, and he was just saying the thing with focus is to always do it 2 years longer than you think you need to, and it's like it's a really good like mental model because it's like everything else probably isn't needed right now, and it's tricky, isn't it? I don't know how to, but you're right. It's about looking inwardly.
Yeah, well, look, I think in that instance it kind of reminds me a little bit of that chat we're just having around tactics for strategy.
Yeah,
which is. You know, sometimes it feels like they're in tension, but really it's about actually can that move be in service of the brand's mission?
Yeah.
And this actually like, you know, maybe just to round out that point around purpose 2.0 and why I think it's important is because we're at a moment, I think, where people are really ready to turn their back on purpose. We're so over an era of brands overrepresenting like the way brands talk can feel so overextended. So when I talk a little bit about like a shrunk ambition for a brand, it's not because I'm down on purpose. It's actually because I'm trying to preserve it against, I don't know, a much smaller vision of what brands can be. But it's fundamentally because I do believe that brands need a really active role in their consumers' lives. They do need an interface with the world. They do need, when people say, do you want to come on, be involved in this opportunity, or do you want to extend in this way, this really clear sense of self that allows them to kind of quite quickly answer whether it's a hell yes or a hell no. Again, there's a business component, which might mean resource-wise it's not the right time. But when it comes to what that brand exists to do and what it wants to add to the lives of its consumers, we do need that kind of simple interface. And I am really worried that we're going to kind of abandon that kind of view of brands as kind of active, involved in the lives of consumers with a point of view on the world. We're going to abandon that view in an effort to kind of solve some of the problems we solved with the first iteration of purpose.
Yeah, the purpose. The purpose thing's interesting because it's almost become. It's just become commonplace, hasn't it?
Yeah,
Really?
And a bit of a cliche.
Yeah, cliche. Yeah, it's not really a.
And almost disconnected from brand now. It's like, oh, well, the brand needs a purpose, but we won't use that really in conversations around business, and we won't really use it in conversations around marketing because it's actually this big, audacious goal, which is, we exist to bring, more happiness to every corner of life, and you'll find out it's a candy brand or something like that. Like, it's become very disconnected.
Also, I think, like, what I love about what you're doing with Bold Bean specifically is there's this whole thing of we need a massive why. Like, what's your big why? And actually, you can start with a small why, and over time, like the why today is going to change tomorrow. Yeah. Right? I think Seth talks about this, which is the circle of us versus the circle of now, which is, he says, brand should try. It doesn't have to happen on fucking day one. Whereas I think people now think day one I have to solve world hunger through selling popcorn. Yeah. Right? He's like, over time, expand your circle of us, sort of the people who the brand looks after. So it could be, the circle of us for Bold Bean would be foodies right now. Yeah. Over time, that may become farmers. Over time, that may become meat eaters. And then the circle of now is like the time frame you're doing it over. And that's the difference, is it's like what Seth's essentially saying is people try and solve everything off the bat. Yeah. And it's like, just if you extrapolate time, as long as the circle of us is extending and the circle of now is getting longer, that's a really nice way of like framing things. And I think it links perfectly to your sort of how do we actually get into our consumers' lives and solve their problems. Yeah. That's a really great circle of now. Yeah. Sorry, circle of us right now, but that can extend over time. Yeah. In terms of, like you said, you work with some of those bigger brands, and actually they struggle to find their, small brands have so many problems they could solve. Yep. Big brands need to create problems. Yep. Let's look at it from that side. Yeah. Like, how do brands struggle, the bigger they are, to find their strategy? Yeah, well, I think, a lot of times you can, when a big client kind of reaches out to a partner or is looking for a new brand strategy, it's often because there's just a sense of lethargy in the place. Like, people kind of feel the mojo's off. People kind of go, there's thousands of people coming to work every day and they don't really know what they're doing. They know what they're doing, but they don't know what it adds up to. And there's that absence of meaning, Interesting. And these are ginormous organizations with super smart people in it, right? If the answer was obvious, they could do it. And frankly, I think if business leaders were kind of going, well, we don't know exactly what it is, but people think we're fixed about 8 things, and they're really excited about those 8 things. I don't think they would reach out to a partner like us. It's usually because actually all the meaning's gone. It's like, right, what the hell do we exist to do anymore? And let's come a little bit closer to that. Oh, yeah. So I think was like a question of what the hell do we exist to do anymore? But then actually, a bit back to the point we're saying, is like brands can't really outrun their origin story. Yeah. If you go back and search what that brand was initially about, often there's something kind of incredibly powerful in that. And I think often when we're working with big brands, sometimes the job is to reconnect them with that kind of history or that origin story. And what's amazingly powerful is sometimes when you click that back into place, like, it sounds kind of like woo-woo, but like there is just something in the ether of an organization. Guys goes, yeah, hell yeah, that's why we existed. Now, it might need a little bit of recalibration to kind of exist in a new era, but there's something kind of really, really powerful in that. I think what you said, the brand archaeology versus creative invention. Yeah. Is there an example where you've gone through the archaeology of the brand and found that sort of that gem of origin story that's you turned into a sparkling piece of purpose? Well, look, a client I worked with for a long time was B&Q, and B&Q found themselves at that kind of moment. Massively successful business in lots of ways, household name, lots of stores, business doing well. Not terrible, not kind of facing a crisis, but with enough kind of headwinds that kind of the team there was starting to kind of go, this brand probably needs to be stronger. There's a lot going on in that category. Certainly when we met them, that forced them to kind of ask that question. And what's really interesting about B&Q is as you get to the heart of that story is like, well, B&Q is not a made-up name. It represents the 2 people who founded it, Block and Quayle. Oh, really? And yeah. Where are they from? The 2, blokes from the UK. Block. His name was Block? No, 2...
like two guys. It's Robert.
Oh, was it their surname?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, I thought his name was Block.
No, that'd be an amazing name for the time. But
so Block and Quail.
Yes, and previous to that, if you wanted to buy things like plaster or a hammer, you had to be kind of a tradesman, because the only place you could kind of buy that stuff was from trade stores, and you'd have to have the kind of right access to be able to do something like that, right? Yeah. They had this kind of radical belief that regular homeowners should be allowed to, or had the capacity to kind of improve their homes. And in that incredibly positive story about people, that kind of fundamental belief in what people are like capable of doing, we kind of saw the kind of future of the business, this kind of ability for people to kind of move their lives forward when they wanted to. And we ended up kind of recognizing that actually the DIY business is often associated with chores. It's like something you kind of, oh my God, like the tap's leaking. Oh God, I need the room needs kind of sprucing up. Like it's often talked about as if it's a chore.
Yeah. I've just moved into a place, I'm looking at the car park, and it's just fucking demanding.
Yeah, but what's really powerful on the other side of that is that actually what people associate with it is change. So people don't see, I need to fix up the carpet. They start to kind of go, God, if I did that, I'd have a completely different room. Or maybe if I put a patio out there, I'd have a stage for summer. Or maybe if I had a different kitchen, my teenage kids would hang around a little bit more. So people thinking a lot more about change. So what we did in our journey with them was kind of really reconnect the brand with this very optimistic view in people and what they're capable of doing, and kind of move the category from being one all about chores to change. Because actually, two guys, however many years ago, had this kind of view that regular people, 50 years, 60 years, or something like that,
nice.
had the capacity to kind of impact their own lives. And that was kind of the answer to so many kind of parts of that kind of brand's, desire for a new energy.
And then when you distilled it into a sentence, what was that? Yeah. What was that process like?
Really, again, like sometimes when you just land upon these things, it becomes really, really quickly. And I find like those sentences tend to move, go in one of two stages. There's a longhand sentence, which broadly kind of centered around like B&Q exists to empower people to kind of move their lives forward. And the expression that we ended up using that became kind of a consumer-facing expression, but also a replacement for that line was...
That's really... I love it when I like stumble upon nuance, because I think that's a thing. So I like this, mate, in the sense that you say you do probably have a slightly longer one for you to like look at.
Becomes precise,
but also maybe longer, so when you're making decisions, because that can be a heuristic for making a decision that's on brand.
Yeah.
But then also I suppose the shorter one, which is more pithy and like, the think different with Apple or whatever.
Yeah.
Because I think a lot of people like think, and I know this, they're like, fuck me, I have to get it down to 4 words. Like, give yourself a bit of space to create
100%.
something. Wow. Okay. So yeah, sorry, what's the long one?
And that was the long one, and the short one was build a life.
Build a life.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And I think you're right. Like, you couldn't peer into the expression of build a life and kind of go, I know exactly what that brand's about. But having been on a journey together, had that kind of slightly longer expression, which I probably kind of butchered ever so slightly. What Build a Life was that shorthand for this idea that we believe in the power of people to kind of move their life forward through DIY.
But I think that long form piece, because I think the thing about strategy is a big part of this is how do you make decisions? Steph's whole thing is pick your customers, pick your future, pick your competitors, pick your future. So you've got to make a choice. And having a longer sentence gives you more space to use it as a compass when you're navigating the sort of the seas of decision making. Whereas I think one of the mistakes I and probably a lot of people listening to make think, I've got to get it into one sentence, mate. It's like, how can I use it for my map? And it's like, hang on a sec. Interesting. Are there any other such nuances or contrarian views you have about anything, marketing, brand? Go for it.
Well, I think one thing we maybe haven't talked like exactly about is like the power of tension.
Yes.
When kind of building a brand strategy, the thing that we're always obsessed with is where's the tension? Because attention kind of tends to exist in the world where you see people's values out of step with their day-to-day practices. So we're really interested in these places where, like, basically the question boils down to this: where are people forced to live their life a certain way when they'd much rather live it a different way? And brands can kind of meet those tensions in really, really interesting ways. So I think any kind of brand builder or brand author out there might want to take this kind of framework and this kind of inquiry of kind of going, okay, how can I become really good at tensions? How can I start kind of seeing consumers through the lens of kind of people who are often doing stuff, but kind of wish things were a different way?
Any examples of that, like in the world right now?
Yeah,
Walk out on Farringdon.
Probably kind of tons of them. Look, I think, let's go back to B&Q. I think the kind of really interesting tension at the heart of that brand was this kind of sense of like, we were living in an incredibly automated world, right? You can order Amazon to your house. You can order Uber to your house. Like, actually, we're feeling more and more powerless about our lives. So actually, the act of being in control of or doing something yourself was becoming this quite radical act. There's something quite romantic to it. That's a very different reality to maybe where we were a while ago, where the idea of that just sounded like labor. It's like, no, actually now it's kind of quite remarkable. Like, it's kind of quite cool at the moment to be able to feel like we can pick up a hammer and change something in our lives. That's kind of like badass. But again, it's that kind of sense of where are people's kind of lives out of step with their kind of like practices. I think you can see it in lots of corners. Now, it's not like to say every element of human life is rife with tension. Of course not. We wouldn't be able to live that way. But wherever you can kind of find that, it becomes kind of super, super interesting.
And so once the say I'm a brand owner and they find the tension, as you call it, what are the next steps and where does the strategy sort of infiltrate that tension?
Well, I think that the tension really is the way to kind of think about the consumer landscape. We're talking about the resource of the brand, like what do you bring to the fight? But the most meaningful fights are going to be where there's a tension. Where is stuff going on in the world that you can act? So I think as we were mapping out Bold Bean's kind of tensions before, I think that's a really interesting place to map. Not just stuff that's of interest, but where are the consumer tensions? Where are the frictions in people's lives?
What were those?
Like I said, there's a tension around kind of soil. Maybe not the most profound tension, but you could kind of argue that we all kind of want the world to be a bit better and we're feeling a little bit helpless about it. So a brand that would allow us to contribute towards farmland being better, that's a tension. There's another tension, of course, around, we love meat, but we all should be eating less meat. That's a tension. And then lastly, though, I think, most of us feel like we'd love to have an identity of being slightly more foodie, a bit more knowledgeable about stuff that's going on, but don't necessarily have the know-how or the kind of power to do so.
How would you find tensions in other categories? Like, is there like is this art or science, or is there?
It's empathy. It's like big doses of EQ, and I think one thing that like makes a really, really powerful brand builder is an expert just in consumer, and a real expert, not just in the kind of abstract sense of I know the numbers, I know the size, I can tell you how many of them, I can tell you where they live, but that EQ component, like what actually is going on in people's lives, where's the kind of friction and the kind of anger at the moment, where's stuff out of step, or where do people wish stuff was a slightly different way?
Is that how does, if someone's trying to develop that EQ, is that how would they go around doing that, do you think? Just
spend a lot of time somewhere, just immerse yourself in it. I think it's very hard to do from behind a desktop. You kind of want to be in and around the kind of people you're trying to serve, I think, to understand it a little bit more. Yes,
interesting. No, I hadn't thought of it like that way. In terms of a brand like, say, British Airways, and the feeling, intangible feeling piece, how do they... What's their strategy? Because again, especially airlines, it feels like it's so saturated.
Yeah.
How do they create the feeling?
Yeah. Well, I think they've kind of got this stumbled across this kind of really, really powerful idea. Obviously they're a ginormous airline, but they're fundamentally a British airline, aren't they? And so you kind of ask yourself the question of like, well, what does that add to why does that need to exist?
Yeah.
And actually one of the most kind of powerful kind of expressions of that is one of the big, and we talked a bit about this at the start of the pod, but like one of the big contributions this country has made is in exporting its creativity. Like, this kind of sense of like actually, whether it's the Beatles or the music, or one of the UK's biggest contributions to the world is creativity. And so this kind of flip from being an airline to actually exporters of British originality was this kind of powerful kind of unlock. What an amazing place to kind of like go to work every day, where you kind of go, we're not simply an airline, we're actually in the business of exporting one of the most kind of precious resources in this country, the originality and the creativity.
Yes.
And it just was a very, very different frame to think about travel, completely, and start to kind of recognize that actually, a brand like British Airways should probably have a conversation, a point of view on Britain, what it is, and this kind of very romantic view that actually this is a country made up of originals. And you do kind of feel that. I certainly kind of love that kind of sentiment, and like do kind of see this kind of like pulsing creativity through the UK, and kind of going like, actually, that's what this nation is. It's a kind of collection of this kind of incredibly originals, and the world would be a less colourful, less interesting place without the UK.
Mate, that's so... Because one thing I was going to ask you is like, why London? Why? What pulled you here? Like, what do you notice for it from your perspective? Because I think what is that for you?
Yeah, like I find the London, particularly UK generally, like one of the most like inspiring places. And I kind of grew up as an Anglophile. Like I was like what's that? Like someone just obsessed with the UK.
Why? Yeah, because I wrote a thing the other day on LinkedIn about basically being like, stop fucking slamming, because everyone's leaving, going to fucking Dubai.
But that's another reason why I love the UK. Because that's what. Yeah,
but I was just like, it just winds me up no end, and I was like, stop slamming the UK. Like we've got actually.
Yeah, but they do it. It's so funny as well. Like, so I just grew up like at a time when like like my kind of it was really during the indie scene. Enemy was huge. I'd always go to like.
What sort of bands did you like?
Oh, like all the indie scene. Like Folds were kind of one of my favorite bands growing up. We then went through the Klaxons thing, and then when there was that kind of thing of like a new indie band a week, like you had Hardfire, and then you had the music, and you had all these other guys, like just an insane kind of like moment. Yeah. I was kind of reading these like 2-week-old airmail copied of like Enemy. I was just obsessed with the idea of the UK. Came over here a bunch when I was kind of like younger, and then I decided to move here. I was that guy back home, and everyone was like, look, you either have to move to London or you have to stop talking about it. You have been like talking about, I was the guy who was going to move to London for about 4 years, and they're like, you have to kind of go or shut up. So that kind of brought it to a head, and I kind of moved over. And then, to be honest, I actually kind of find it like, it was actually quite a hard place to land at first.
Because?
The weather's kind of a bit different than it is in Sydney. I could say that. I kind of think about London, there's not a lot of soft edges, you know what I mean? Like, you hop on the bus, people don't say hello to the bus driver, it's like,
aggressive,
people are, so just a bigger city. People don't go out of their way to say hello. It's just a very different dynamic to where I was at before. But I've actually ended up finding it one of the most inspiring places. I love like the creativity of this place. I think across all creative spheres, like, whether it's the commercial creative sphere that I'm in, but music, fashion, like I think some of the most interesting places
what's
are
so
here.
Interesting about the London specifically is if you go, everything's here.
Yeah.
So I interviewed, linked to me, a guy, Rory linked me, the guy. That's probably not the best way of saying it, but this guy called David Cleveley, fucking tech don, built like these massive, built the Cambridge network, and he's got a great book called owns Bocca di Lupo as well. Serendipity, It Doesn't Happen by Accident. Interviewed him the other week, and he was basically saying you have this what you want is one, people to have a curious mind, prepared mind. 2, you need people to be the systems and the networks to kind of have this cross-pollination of different, as you say, bands, art, fashion, theatre. That melting pot creates this kind of serendipity, and this creativity blossoms. And I think conversely, like if you go to America, it's like if you want to go into politics, you go to Washington. If you want to go into Hollywood, you go to LA. If you want to go into finance, you go into New York. Like we have it all in one little weird small place. It's mad, isn't it?
Yeah. Have you ever read like the author Stephen Johnson?
No.
So he, I think, it's fair to say, kind of was really instrumental in kind of breaking the kind of metaphorical image of where creativity comes from. It used to be Newton under a tree, apple hits you in the head, oh my, eureka moment. And this idea that creativity like was a lightning bolt that struck kind of the genius mind. And he, in a similar way to you've just described, did all this kind of research and exploration and, looked into the science, looked into the kind of experience of creatives, all this kind of stuff. And actually found that that's a terrible metaphor. Actually, what we have in our head at any given time, these kind of buzzing hypotheses that we need to clash with new stimulus.
Yes.
And so it's why, like, intuitively, I think we all know it. When we're really stuck on something, we don't want to just sit at our desk and kind of go, come on, crack. You want to get out. And it's because your brain is just searching for that slightly, like, different kind of stimulus that opens up and allows you to see something in a different way. And, the book Where Good Ideas Come From is just transformational. So you should read it.
Where Good Ideas Come From.
Yeah, it's this incredible book. And they talk a little bit about the scientist who kind of discovered DNA.
Wow.
They had been playing around with the concept and could kind of spot something that was starting to help them understand it, but they couldn't really make sense of what they were seeing. And this is where you're kind of like, my lack of scientific knowledge will really kind of show here. But, they kind of were trying to conceptualize in their mind what DNA was based on everything that they were seeing. And then being the massive brainiac that they were, they kind of went home and their kind of evening reading was all about mythology, and they were reading about the Ouroboros, that kind of snake that eats itself, that circular snake.
Wow.
And it was at that moment that they kind of like conceived this idea of the double helix, something that kind of turned back on itself. And you know what I mean? It's just a great example. Like my example is more like walking around kind of Broadway Market and looking at like some people's fashion and how that kind of inspires me. This is kind of like reading mythology to unlock kind of a massive scientific discovery.
But they're both just as important.
I was just so transformed by that kind of process, which is like, oh shit, like actually we kind of carry around these unsolved problems in our head, and then our brain is desperately trying to clash them with new stimulus to kind of open up the way we might see it. And it's like, oh right, this kind of completely tangential thing has helped me see it in a different way.
On that note then, how's London more creative or slightly differently creative to Sydney?
I just think the density of kind of like stimulus here is insane. Like, you know, I like the area I live in, kind of East London, I think is some of the most kind of creative people. I'm like so inspired by the fashion. I think, you know, music here, I can't speak eloquently exactly where it kind of comes from, but like the kind of music scene here is just amazing. I don't know if it comes from a reaction of boredom or, you know, the weather or just a kind of great lineage now of incredible kind of music and creativity is so much in the ether. I don't know, but like the density of creativity here is kind of mad. And I also just think that the density of stimulus is like, you know, we're just sitting on the roof before and like the architecture that you look at, you know what I mean?
Mate, yeah, for listeners, the view up the top of this place is
like, and I said, no, we're then back to the basement for our thing.
It's just so interesting to see your perspective, mate, on it. And then, like, what was sort of surprising about coming to London? What surprised you?
Oh, that's a good question. I'm going to grab this coffee that's been delivered. Do you want more coffee?
Yeah, go for it, yeah.
Surprised me. Good question.
Is this, so what's...
what surprised me?
What surprised you about London when you got here? So, like, for example, I went to Colombia. So that's a brand. That's a bit different. No. Sorry, I'm just saying from my perspective as a Brit going to Colombia, is I was sort of just kind of what surprised me about them is just how culturally and anthropologically is like how party people they are. Yeah. They fucking love I mean, I probably should have known that with, but like, but as in, and you actually see it on there, you're like fucking hell. But then also just how the infrastructure there is awful compared to the UK, and it's like something you don't think about. It's like if a train says it's going to be here in 2 minutes in the UK, and this was hilarious. It's all moaning about the fucking underground. Like, oh my god, the fucking tube strikes, the fucking. But it's like, mate, go to Colombia. Like it may say 2 minutes, but it could be 2 days before your train rocked up. Like that's what I'm trying. That's the tone I'm trying to pull.
Like in that way, everything, you know, but. This is amazing dialogue between Australia and the UK that makes it like super novel to come to London. Like we've both got pubs, but there's a slightly different vibe. And so, you know, like we could have a big argument over what the right beer size is because like in New South Wales where I'm from, like you get a schooner that's more like a...
New South Wales, is that a city or a state?
Sydney, it's a state. So I'm from Sydney. So you get like a 380ml beer here. And so like a pint glass is a lot bigger, you know, and so... Like we can have a long debate over what is the optimal side. I've got very strong kind of feelings on that.
Which is gone. No, I'm serious because like I watched the thing and the guy was like, "Mate, the reason I love London is you get full fucking pints." And I was like,
I always think.
And then the other thing goes, "The reason I love London is because of M&S."
I think the worst, like the last 2 sips of any beer are the worst. I just think they're so manky by the state. So I'm like, you wouldn't have this issue with a schooner glass.
So true.
But at the same time, you're still in a pub and we're talking about like the difference of 100 mils. Do you know what I mean? So this is what's so great between the places. Like there's great familiarity, but these kind of slight differences. You know, I do think the creativity, like everyone talks about like New York and, you know, other kind of sea centers, like the creativity in London is insane. And just of the people, of the kind of culture. Like I said, it's
this is the David Cleavely thing. It's the which I think the Brits do really well. Maybe it's because it's a small country, but it's this idea of competition, cooperation, and competition, whereby it's, you know, the rock bands are competing, for example, to get on stage. But they're actually kind of mates as well. So they're sharing ideas. They're sharing how they got there. You see this as an art as well. You see this in fucking podcasting. Like there's like, I've always said like spent a lot of time in Lisbon because my mate was out there, and like I love it. It's a city, but I basically bosh through all the food in like 3 weeks. Like whereas this is like there's constantly a new restaurant starts, competition, cooperate because they become friends. It gets better and better and better and better and better. So you said interesting, and you said some of my favourite bands, and I think some of the best, I think there's a lot of lessons brands can learn from bands. what would you say are some? Because I went to go and see Oasis.
Yeah.
And I think that they're the line of you need to be yourself. You can't be no one else.
Yeah.
Is like the greatest, like one of the best lines ever about what you define yourself as a brand. Yeah. Like, what are the lessons brands can take from? I'm gonna get my brands and my bands are gonna.
Yeah. Like this is like thought piece central. I think people like to talk about this for days. And there's maybe some like kind of really silly stuff that people get into, but fundamentally, I think there's two things come to mind. One is conviction. We're talking a little bit before about strategy versus tactics. Like bands aren't changing their vibe or what they think is cool or their style. Like, well, at least the best brands. Like, do you know what I mean? Like,
Oasis.
Yeah, you know what I mean? Like, they're still rocking Stone Island after all. Exactly. Like Stone Island, like there's just so much conviction there, and like it's amazing. There's this incredible quote. I don't know if you ever heard their quote about like I don't want to get the award show wrong, but like one of the award shows, and they were asked to play, and they said like, right, like if you don't play this award show, your career will be ruined. And he'll say like, the kind of quote was like I'll choose when I ruin my career, not you. Like, who the fuck are you? Like,
was this Oasis?
Yeah, Oasis, and just that kind of conviction is just amazing. I think that's definitely the other thing. And then to circle it back to the world of strat, like there's also the whole thing around fame. Like that actually. What bands have is they're incredibly famous. Like they're driven by fame, and I think fame has become a little bit of a dirty word amongst kind of certain kind of pockets of brands. We're maybe a bit scared of being famous. Well, we don't necessarily want to be out there, but fame really is the thing that grows brands. Like the fact that like as soon as you say Oasis, like we both want to like launch into a 40-minute kind of conversation over best song, best things, what happened, what do you make of the concert? Like the fact that like we're talking about it because we both know it and we both have a point of view on it, and like we're both like reacting to it, like that is the fuel for it. And like bands use it and they don't kind of chase that obviously, but like you can see it play the kind of power of fame.
I also think it's like back to your resources point is when you study bands is they use their resources.
Yeah, 100%.
And so it's like if you look at Liam Gallagher's an incredible frontman, but he's say comparatively to Mick Jagger. Yeah. Mick Jagger's dancing around in like, but that's
very different.
Yeah. But that's what I'm trying to say.
In the best kind of way. Yeah.
But they're using their resources. They're not trying to be something they're not. They're not trying to conjure up things that aren't in their archaeology or their wheelhouse anyway. And like Gallagher, he walks out, he's got that fucking tambourine on his head, and he's just like, do the Ponze, whatever it is there. Whereas like, Mick Jagger's whole thing is dancing around.
Yeah.
And I think there's definitely a lesson in using your own resources to create your own fame.
Yeah.
How can brands create their... Again, this is probably the $1 million question, but it's an important question, is how can brands begin to think about creating fame?
Yeah. And we've probably made like a kind of a hard right turn out of Oasis to say, well, wouldn't it be easy if you were as famous as Oasis? And everyone's going to tune out. Like, it's not really the point. There's been a lot of research as to like what makes the most powerful kind of brand comms or communication from people.
Yeah.
And if you broadly bucket it down, there's this kind of rational comms. Hey, we use twice as many peanuts in our kind of peanut butter. That's a rational job,
So there's two types of comms. Rational comms?
Three types.
Oh,
rational,
3 types.
Emotional, and then fame. Rational, twice as many, whatever, half the sugar, half the price. Second is emotional. Like, actually, when you give your kids this chocolate bar, you're not giving them chocolate, you're giving them love. God doesn't make me feel kind of amazing as a parent. There's the emotional strategy. And there's a third bucket, which is a bit harder to categorize because its main impact is like, holy shit, have you seen that? Like, I just have to talk to people about it. And comms that play in that area are just called fame. And what we see is the most powerful form of comms is that third bucket, fame. Rational's the least. Emotional moves the dial a lot more. That makes sense. We're more emotional creatures than we are rational. But what really kind of accelerates brands is fame. When you hit that kind of, holy shit, did you see that? Like, when like the brand kind of leaves the kind of like advertising sphere and ends up in WhatsApp and Instagram DMs and water cooler chat. That really is steroids for brands.
Wow.
So, you asked how do you get there, right? Like, I think the first thing to do is to know that. I actually think there's a lot of brands that have a really uncomfortable relationship with fame. Like, are we really happy to be that prolific? Are we really that happy for two people having a conversation that we're not able to moderate or change? Like, that is an uncomfortable kind of thought experiment for some people. Some people like to kind of remain a little bit kind of niche. Then the next thing I think, if you're thinking about fame is conversation, right? Like two people talking about the thing that's going on. I've always had this belief that you could maybe be so creative that you could create something that I'd be like, oh my God, have you seen this thing? We just have to talk about this. The Old Spice ad, right? Back in the day, like, I don't know if you were around for that, but I was like...
Was that the geezer walking down the beach?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, there we go.
But everyone was talking about the ad. Like, it was just an ad that was so brilliantly written, so brilliantly shot, so hilarious that everyone was like talking about it. But actually, it's quite hard to manufacture conversation. So it's much easier to run towards where there's already a conversation and kind of play there. And so back to that point around tension, wherever there's kind of heat and friction, there tends to be a little bit of conversation. God, I really wish things like this is so infuriating the way things are. So I actually just, have a kind of a question, which is like, how many brands put fame as their number one KPI? Like, we must be seen. We must have people talking about it.
Sorry to interrupt.
No.
Perfect Ted. You seen them?
Mm-hmm.
Teddy's a really good mate. Been on the podcast a few times.
Oh, amazing.
Perfect example of tension. So, the London tube strikes, again, that's all kicking off about it. Oh, fucking hell.
Yeah.
Lime bike. Obviously, everyone was going mental about getting a Lime bike. They got up early in the morning. Well, I don't know that they did that, but I think that they must have done. Yeah. Kind of such a silly point that, but anyway, they were launching their new lime flavored matcha.
Yeah.
Put them in the baskets of the Lime bikes.
Yeah.
So that's the fame, tension, and kind of like, that's so interesting.
Yeah, and look,
then also I suppose solving a problem as well.
I don't want to speak for those guys because I'm not close to that brand. Like, I love the brand and am so like impressed by their success. But, if I was going to break down what I've seen them do across some of the dimensions we've talked about, like, actually, they recognize there's kind of a pretty interesting kind of tension in people's lives, which is not as ginormous as kind of world hunger, but it's simply like, God, there's so much heat around matcha at the moment, but it's really hard to make and get and access, like how many people are getting up and kind of whisking their matcha every morning. There's kind of this kind of massive curiosity and interest in matcha, but actually quite a big kind of barrier to entry that the product just kind of solves amazingly. And then you start to kind of think about some of the levers that they've kind of pulled, like going on Dragon's Den, such a kind of strong pitch, kind of got Steven involved. Like,
are levers tactics?
Yeah. I'd probably kind of call levers like tactics, and then all of a sudden they've started kind of, creating a lot of fame. I feel like, there's at any given time like 3 or 4 people in this office talking about Perfect Ted, having an opinion on it. Oh my God, they got a new flavor. Oh my God, this person's on board. Like, they seem to have a really kind of strong flywheel around it. And there's an interesting thing going on, like around, how some of these food brands are creating, because there's almost an ecosystem. If you can jump on, it becomes incredibly powerful.
What do you mean by that?
Well, like if you can get on in front of Dragon's Den, have a great kind of soundbite that comes out of that, that's kind of like instant kind of fame if you kind of play it right. If you get the right kind of founder on board, whether through Dragon's Den or elsewhere, that can be kind of a moment. Yeah. There's a real, curiosity in the food scene at the moment. So people are interested in who's making moves, who's taking on investment, so there is a lot of kind of fame going on around that, which I think is powering a lot of brands. And I think it'd be so much more powerful if brands also ask themselves, well, what are we going to do to kind of like agitate that kind of conversation?
It's such an interesting point. Because the other thing, Lincoln, is sort of culturally is there's the whole, again, I think our cultures definitely share this, is the sort of tall poppy syndrome, which is like, don't get above your station, mate. Whereas the Americans are like, bro, let's get after it, baby. Like, do you know what I mean? Whereas I think but actually it kind of does feel a bit uncomfortable to say to a British brand and or founder, like, are you going to be famous?
Yeah.
How do you be famous?
Yeah.
Be famous as an objective. And actually, the more I think about it, the brands that I probably do reference the most in my newsletters on the podcast are Bold Bean, are Perfect Ted, are Dash.
Yeah.
I think the audaciousness of Dash, when they did I don't know if you saw it was like a Coca-Cola, the red one, not the red one, the Coke Zero.
Yep.
They fucking smashed, put the Dash thing over it.
Yep.
It's like, drink to feel good.
Yeah.
It's super interesting.
Yeah.
How do you think about brand strategy having to change as the world changes, and because I think the consumers change as you move from sort of early adopters to that mass market? So everything you're saying, do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah. Look, and this is maybe going to be a little bit controversial. Brand strategy really should be done once and then set.
Interesting.
I don't really believe in pivoting it across growth. I think you have to reconcile the challenge of what can we do and stand for today that's going to be just as relevant as we scale. To go back to
is that a mistake you think a lot of brands make? Is they suddenly think as we get bigger we need to reinvent them?
And sometimes there's that philosophy. I also just think there is a lot of chopping and changing of strategy. Things have dramatically changed, but brands really only have a set amount of options available to them. We like to think that actually we could bring out a piece of paper and Perfect Ted could be a super premium product tomorrow and only sell at this price point, or actually could go into cola and it'd be have something without match it. Like actually, there's brands operating quite a tight zone really of where they can operate. So the job is becoming really crystal clear on what's kind of right. And one of the questions as to what's right is what's going to govern this brand long term. What is going to power the brand today, but going to set us up for growth in the future? Not simply get the fire started now, so we have to change it wholesale a bit down the line, if that makes sense. So I think kind of strategy has to be kind of set and kept. That's the power of it. And it brings another dimension to the job of creating strategy, which is what's going to be just as true for this small audience as it is going to be for a much bigger audience.
Yes, because we're singing from the same hymn sheet, maybe in different tones, but this is essentially what Seth was saying is. Just because you succeed when it's small doesn't mean you'll succeed when it's big. Mm-hmm. Just because you succeed when it's new doesn't mean you'll succeed when it's old. And he says, the adoption curve, that bell curve, there's this thing called the chasm or chasm.
Yep.
And it's like some brands make it, and then they spread to mass market brand. Some don't, and they fall down. Well, actually, the nuance is that you don't have to always, but let's just say for the argument's sake, you are trying to be, with your thing there, mate, of like the strategy should be the same today as we move along this adoption curve. It shouldn't really have to change.
Yep.
What are the challenges then that you see coming along that?
Well, I think what the brand stands for and stands to achieve should be written in such terms that it sounds like a big, grand vision for the brand. Something, a behavior it wants to see across the whole country. We want to see everyone in the UK being obsessed. That's an inherently scalable mission. So I think it needs that scale to it. And I think a sentence like that can sit across that adoption curve slide that you're kind of mentioning. Mm-hmm. I think what happens is there's some tactics available to new brands that are exclusively available to new brands that are incredibly powerful. And maybe some brands get caught up in fueling those fires that they don't think about the big picture. So some of that small stuff is, God, it's amazing. We've got a small community who actually want to ideate and tell us what the next product should be. They want to vote on the name of our flavor. This is stuff that big brands don't have access to. You know what I mean? Like if a big kind of Pepsi brand comes out and says, what should we name this? You're going to get a lot of Bodie McBoat faces. When a small brand does it, you get like thousands of people thinking very, very diligently about it because they have that sense of ownership and passion. And that's the kind of benefit of early adopters. But, as you get slightly larger and the way you cross that chasm, mind you, that framework is used mainly for tech, where there's a little bit more skepticism, but maybe the kind of spirit holds true a bit more broadly. If you want to cross that chasm, you have to recognize that there's an early mainstream who basically look back and kind of go, is this product legit? Have enough people used it? Like, have I got some trust in it through the crowd? And so it means that some of those kind of things that created lots of excitement just aren't going to excite that group. Like, hey, come buy the brand and you'll have a chance to kind of tell us what the product should be named. That's not really going to get a mainstream audience. What a mainstream audience is going to look for is like, oh my God, like a few thousand people love this brand. And so I suppose what I'm advocating for is, do you have something you can write across the top of that chart that you're like, it's going to be true now when we're serving 10 people, but also when we get up to that kind of 80% critical mass, it's going to be just as relevant.
So interesting. And also, but I think the other part of this, which again, I've never really explored, is the brand, sometimes you can do as much to control the brand, but the brand actually does live within the consumer's head as well. Like, how do you think about that?
Well, it's worth just kind of chatting a little bit more about that. Like a brand strategy, a brand could be kind of positioned to kind of absolutely swim with early adopters, and it probably would be a brand strategy. Let me kind of improvise here and leave some of the rules I said were important on the thing. But, this is going to be the world's first co-created prebiotic soda. We're not going to make a move with our community. You vote on everything. That might be a really interesting kind of contagious idea that kind of catches on amongst a really small crew. And then it'll scale and you get past those kind of early adopter audiences and you kind of go, great, we're humming. Like the flywheels, people interacting, people are saying the product's getting great feedback, they're all hyped, they're super engaged. Look at our engagement numbers versus everyone else. And then you turn to that kind of early mainstream audience and say, come join in. This is the most collaborative thing. That early mainstream audience wants something very, very different from that group. And in the same way, you wouldn't be able to find an early adopter audience by kind of going, this is the nation's favorite prebiotic, soda. We've done a taste test. No one doesn't like that. That's not going to excite an audience. So there is a push and pull in what they ask from brands, and that's why you need that far bigger mission. So it allows you to kind of go, look, we're on a mission here to make the world bean
What's the
obsessed.
difference between mission, strategy, and vision?
Look, mission and vision, I think you can use kind of interchangeably, and I think strategy is asking what that mission and vision is there to do. The strategy kind of says the mission and vision is there to kind of create a brand that people really desire. So strategy is like the genre, and the mission and vision is maybe the kind of nature of the kind of expression.
Okay, with you. Fascinating. So the Tony's chocolate, Seth detailed the Tony's chocolonely example when he said, like, in that early adopter stage, and I'd love to get your take on what their strategy is on this, but is people, 10, because that brand's been going around, it feels like it's 6 years here, but which it is essentially, but it's been going for 20 years. And those early diehard fans, they're going to a dinner party, and so they're saying, "Oh my God, have you seen the situation with what's going on in the cocoa industry? There's chocolate brands saving it. Look at the bar; it's got this jagged edges, and it shows the inequality in the supply chain." And Seth says we buy things for 3 reasons. It gives us status, elevates our position, gives us affiliation, connection to people, or a freedom of fear. Like we don't want to be the odd one out, essentially. So like in the early days, you're getting high status from like, oh my God, I've got this chocolate bar. You're sort of telling a story, and you're getting connection to like those people who are trying to save the world. But then he goes, let's be realistic now. It's if you're in America and it's Halloween or it's giving out candies, whatever. It's like basically they're like, oh, my little kid, Dolly doesn't want to rock up. The new in-brand sweets is Tony's chocolonely, whatever. We don't want to give their kids Nestle. So it's actually the story's changed from like, oh my God, like kind of purpose, as you would say, to like fear of missing out. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And would you say the brand strategy can encompass both those stories?
I think it has to. Yeah, I think it has to.
Yeah.
I think you need something to kind of recognize that to get a brand off the ground, it's very, very powerful to have that early group of people who feel disproportionately invested. For whatever reason, the mission clicks, the product clicks, the problem that you solve is just more present in their life than it is with others. It just grabs that small crew and that community and kind of has that crew that's kind of ride with it from day one. That's massively important. But as you get bigger, just by the kind of the laws of marketing that we were just talking about, the more people you add will become less kind of connected or kind of rusted onto the brand. And so the whole brand story can't be around a very, very deep connection. Deep connection and purpose, yes, but not deep, like I need you to contribute every day. I need you to do this for us every day. We want like a very one-to-one connection, the way that kind of early partners of a brand really do want.
Interesting. Yeah, because Grenade had a similar situation where their brands. Al was saying to me, Grenade the protein bars. He was saying to me that they started out as like a, and this is probably tactics. So they just wanted to create. Say their strategy was create really delicious low sugar protein bars. Yeah. That could be their like big sentence. The actual tactic of that on the ground as you become big is they did their whole thing of, driving the tank into the NEC. They had the Grenade fat loss pills. I took them before I had a napper. It was jokes, didn't really work, but fuck it. And then, but their bars initially were like this kind of dark green. And Al was saying, he was at a trade show and someone said, we love your product, but we it's not really for us because it's for people in the army. And then they went into retail and he was like, right, and now obviously their bars are like so colourful. Yeah. And it's just opened up that market, but also made them stand out in retail. Yeah. It's wild.
Well, I think that's a brand that, again, I think of them through that lens of tension, right? Which is like, it's not a ginormous world tension, but there is a really big truth, which is like if you're kind of health conscious, like chocolate's off the table for you. If you're like a protein obsessed, macro watching, calorie counting, just gym involved person,
Gym bro, yeah,
like it's completely off the table for you. And like what a friction, because we also maybe I'll get that Lindt 99% cocoa, like. Like there is just a genuine friction there in people's kind of lives. And you're like, no, like here is a peanut butter chocolate cookie bar that tastes 80% as good as the competitor, but like actually is just full of protein, not kind of sugar and fat. Like that's a really kind of like powerful kind of tension and that they've kind of gone and solved. Now, if you kind of had that, you might kind of go, well, what are all the ways we're going to mine that? What kind of ways can we make that problem and the fact that we solve it really famous? Do we have the right kind of design identity that signals that that's the problem that we solve? Like all that stuff, I think, kind of starts to become a bit simpler if you have that clarity of kind of tension. And like I get the sense that brand wouldn't exist without a founding team that really understood that kind of problem in people's lives.
Well, that's what he said. Is he goes, for a long time I marketed, because he was again about knowing your category, knowing your consumer. His whole thing throughout the whole interview was, I am the consumer.
Yeah.
And it's like in the sense that he was a wholesaler.
Yeah.
So it's like we're getting all these amazing branded products that taste shit.
Yeah.
And then all these tasty products that are marketed or
amazing.
Branded and stuff. It's interesting.
And like everyone, that just friction is such a powerful place to kind of grow a brand. And then they sell for crazy numbers, and it's like, okay, right, that's kind of the proof of it.
What are some of your other sort of contrarian views on marketing versus other CMOs, etc., or strategists?
Look, I think there is this kind of desire to like almost let kind of brands retreat a little bit. Like, oh, okay, we've just got to focus on, have we got our set of colors? Have we got our kind of, kind of marketing assets? I'm much like, I think that one of the biggest challenge brands have is the kind of modern media landscape and all the ways that you need to connect with people. You are doing in-person events. You are doing you are trying to populate an Instagram feed every day. You're trying to do a thoughtful kind of Substack. You're trying to do a really entertaining TV ad. And I think kind of actually the explosion of touch points that brands need to offer mean that they do really need this very clear sense of like what role they play in the world, so they can have a far sharper filter. Because when something happens, like the Lime bike, the kind of tube strike and, Lime bike kind of, event that kind of happened, like, you don't want to be standing still there and kind of going, what should we comment on this? Is this of interest to us? Is this something that's kind of like meets our world? Like I think brands with a really clear kind of sense of who they are and what they stand for have a really simple interface with the world. That means when something happens, they kind of go, this is not really for us. That's not something that we need to talk about. Or they go, no, we've absolutely got to run towards this. This is massively kind of interesting for us.
Mate, it's another thing I'm picking up from you, mate, is the importance of brand strategy as actually a decision-making heuristic, or like, it basically allows you to say no rapidly, fast. Yeah. Whereas I think if you don't have that lucid, polished clarity in your brand strategy, you can end up going around asking a lot of questions. Yeah. Or trying to answer a lot of questions.
We call our framework here the brand OS, brand operating system, because it's exactly that. And it probably expands on some of these kind of principles that we've been talking about, but it's effectively built around 5 inquiries, which aren't particularly radical, but they are focused. We've left a lot on the table and said, like, these for us are the 5 things that really matter. So there are 4 kind of inside territories that then culminate in like a kind of a central kind of thought.
So when you say inside territories?
Inside territories. So let me kind of speak you through the kind of quadrants that we ask brands to be really, really clear on. Because having worked with really great brands and frankly some not so great brands in the past, the brands that really seem to cut through and succeed are very clear on 5 dimensions.
Cool.
The first one is who they're for. There's a lot of debate around the role of audience. I think sometimes people like a persona. It's like, oh, we serve, John, the chocolate bar loving gym rat. Some people kind of go, actually, well, we're trying to sell to everyone. Our audience is the world. What we like to focus on is a community. What is that kind of group, and that group that's kind of connected by a set of values that you're going to serve? Because, if you want to go fast, go alone, but if you want to go far, go with someone. So who the brand really should be responsible to or answerable to something bigger than itself. And so having a really clear set of what community the brand serves is the first That's the first thing we ask.
And so when you say that's more psychographic versus demographic?
I think a community can kind of exist in lots of different ways, but it's effectively a group of people who are bound either geographically, ideologically, or digitally in some sort of way.
Okay, cool.
But the really important thing is that they do exist. I think so often when trying to come up with an audience, particularly at the start of a brand, is to kind of write a person or a community or a crew that you wish existed. We're after people who wish they could spend more on tin coffee every day. It's like, that would be fantastic for a coffee brand, but they probably don't exist. So you actually have to start by kind of go, like, let's find a crew that really, really exists. But when you have that, it means that the brand is answerable to something bigger than itself, and it's really, really powerful.
Cool.
Who's
this for?
Yeah.
Brilliant.
The second thing we ask the brand to look at is its foundations. Back to that point before, like a brand's origin story is so powerful. It really grounds the mission. It means even as we get big and we start doing lots of different stuff, there's a clear sense of what we were trying to achieve that's rooted and kind of central to the way we see ourselves. So it means that as brands do hundreds of things when they just used to do one thing, it can always come back and say to itself, like, right, why did we start? And are we still on that mission? And that just gives the brand some coherency, some cohesion in a really, really important way. The next thing we ask for is field. And the field is to kind of go that actually most powerful brands tend to have a guilty conscience. They kind of look at the conventions of their category and they kind of ask themselves, what things are important here and what are we prepared to break? And that's a really interesting kind of question, right? Like if you're launching a new brand, there's sometimes that people kind of go, these things are sacred. We absolutely must be in this store. Our packaging absolutely must be glass or in this kind of format. We absolutely must have a playful tone of voice because we can't be too serious in this category. Now, some of those are true, but you really need to kind of list all the conventions of a category and then ask yourself, well, which of these ones are we prepared to break? Like every brand I know that's been incredibly successful is aware of what conventions of this category it's willing to break. It doesn't break all of them, but it does have the ones that is completely prepared to rip the rule book up. And usually they're kind of seen as sacrosanct until that moment and everyone kind of goes, God, why do we see stuff that way?
Is there any examples on that?
Yeah, I think you can kind of think of lots of things. I think you can think of Bold Bean's packaging, and then you can think about their tone of voice and the fact they're called Bold Bean in the premium thing and the kind of colourfulness and the kind of vibrancy of a brand operating in a premium space. We don't tend to think of that. I think of kind of Monzo launching with their coral card. Anyone could have done that. That kind of
coral card,
as in the
pink card.
Yeah, the pink coloured card.
Yeah.
And the idea that actually their kind of most important marketing moment when they were starting out is when that coral card goes down on a sea of kind of black and blue cards.
And I suppose the downstream of that is entering the conversation, entering the culture.
It's incredibly talkable, incredibly famous, but that was available to anyone.
Yeah. Any other darling examples?
Well, I think that the reason why that example is so interesting. Imagine if you're starting a bank and you kind of go, guys, people are going to trust us with their salary, their money. We must be taken seriously. But the idea that they kind of have the bravery to kind of go, yeah, but that doesn't mean colours off the table. It doesn't mean we be black and blue. We absolutely need to cultivate trust, but we're going to pilot this space. To me, is kind of so interesting. I think lots of other brands kind of play in that kind of space. I mean, the last kind of one, and we can kind of come back and dive into any of these.
Yeah.
Is fix. Back to that point before. What is going on in the world, and particularly in your consumers' lives? Where is that tension that the brand might be able to kind of operate and resolve? And with those four inquiries, we kind of land on that kind of purpose statement that we were talking about before. We call it a fire because we kind of believe that statement should have energy to it. So that's why we kind of call it a fire. So those four elements kind of focus a brand's kind of purpose. If you can kind of get that stuff right, then that's a very, very clear sense of what the brand's about.
So who's this for?
Who's this for?
Yeah, next one.
What's the brand's foundations? Why did it start? What's its origin story? The field, what rules in this category are we prepared to break that everyone else is going to treat as sacrosanct? And then what's the tension that we kind of are aware of and seek to solve in what we do?
What's your sort of diagnosis of Guinness's proliferation and success?
I think they've done some kind of things kind of absolutely kind of brilliantly. One, I think they've kind of really maybe kind of done a lot of thinking about who the audience can be. I think one of the kind of really impressive things about that is how they've kind of gone from a choice of some to the mainstream thing that everyone kind of needs. And I think the way they kind of start to conceptualize that brand is this kind of communal kind of thing and not just a niche product is super, super interesting. I think the fact that they embrace their difference, the kind of fact that they have always been really comfortable kind of going, we're not going to hide the fact that it's kind of a pain in the ass to do, takes a little bit more time, it looks a bit different, it feels a bit heavier. They're going to be the things that we make kind of super interesting. And the idea that they've now kind of taken all those things and pointed them towards the way of refreshment and started going, yeah, all those things, but they're refreshing. Like that has that kind of surprising logic to it, that has that kind of like that guilty mind that I was talking about in field, you know. Like we're going to look at the kind of category.
When you say guilty mind in field?
Guilty mind is by kind of going, okay, what are the conventions of this category?
Yeah.
And what are we going to break with? Like what are the rules that everyone else is here feels like they're absolutely constrained by that we're going to play with? You know, the idea that stouts can be for summer, like that's just like insane. Like the lagers must have been like, oh my God, like this was our space. Like we have the sunshine thing. Like the fact that they're doing that incredibly well. So, you know, look, it's not a brand I've studied or been close to, but I think they kind of shift into kind of becoming a nation drink and kind of being like this kind of like universal kind of drink is kind of really, really powerful, and like a statement about the kind of country at large is super interesting. And I think the fact that they have kind of started to kind of break with the rules of the category and start to kind of go, yeah, we're heavy, yeah, we take some time, but that's actually a good thing, and it's not something we're going to hide away from. Is really powerful.
I love this. Like, what's the category code, and how do we break it? Because I think this will help a lot of people. They can, you know, literally write a list of the norms.
100%.
And I think one of the things I read is, well, as I know Rory talks about this a lot, but like, there's like turning bugs into features. So the slower serve is actually, there's more care. There's actually an experience around it. But then I read somewhere that they'd either done something with these sort of brand quake situations where they do this big one or two things, or big levers or big tactics that have this kind of massive explosion. But they did something with Kim Kardashian. I read that somewhere. And they also sponsored, like, I think it was like, they did like, it was, I think it was either, that one, it might have been like a lingerie brand or something like that in the States. And they sponsored like this, like quite kind of event, but it was all the influencers were going there. Yeah. They were serving like actual Guinness, but also Guinness cookies and stuff. And then that's just opened up their whole, just whole delta of potential customers. It's a mad story.
Isn't there a thing with them as well? And, you know, like, you know, some people who can speak so much better about like Guinness over the last kind of 5-10 years and what they've done so perfectly.
Split the G's, another thing.
Yeah, I like wherever that magic kind of came from. But like, I think the most interesting thing is, and I don't know the story well enough, but when they basically sacrificed a few other beers that they had in their arsenal and said, no, we're going to go all in on Guinness.
Oh, really?
And this was like decades ago now.
It's that conviction piece, isn't it?
Yeah. And I actually think that's where it started. Like, it's that kind of got that burn the boats thing, which is like, no, we're going to go all in and this has to work. And, you know, I think the way Rory and so many others talk about like the story of Guinness and its rituals and how that kind of just chimes with the brain in really pleasant ways and gets talked about, like all that stuff is super right. But I actually love the fact that like that organization many, many years ago had to make a bet and said like, we can't be supporting, I forget their other beer that they were running at the time. It's like, we have to go all in on one. And then that was kind of, for me, such a pivotal moment. You know, I think so much of the success is probably drafting on the fact that like, no, this is our commitment. We're going to make this work.
Yes, I suppose that breaks the category codes of other brewers, which is like let's have lots of different products.
Let's have a beer for every occasion.
Yes,
you know what I mean. Like, oh, okay, we've got this fantastic stout, does really well at Christmas time in the cold pubs, but we need to innovate a brand new product for summer. Like, no one's going to want our, you know, the idea that this beer is, you know, having to kind of become more and more universal. And in doing so, like, yeah, you are right. That's kind of like a break the category conventions. Like, I think that's downstream of that decision to kind of go, no, we are all in on Guinness. Yeah, having the courage of your convictions. What's the most like sort of courageous or hard decision you've made with any of your clients? Look, you know, I think there's this kind of like off-quoted thing, which is like strategy really is the art of sacrifice. You know, strategy is the art of sacrifice. Yeah. Fuck, that's great. Yeah, it's like, well, what are all the things you're going to leave behind? You know, what are you going to like leave on the table? And I think the journey that we go on with our clients is always kind of challenging in that respect, because you get in when you're having these kind of conversations, you find yourself in a moment, you're kind of authoring the new chapter of a brand, you recognize some decisions are going to have to be made. But then you fast forward to the conversation, you're kind of going like, oh my goodness, we're going to leave that on the table. We're going to kind of forgo a whole nother beer. We're going to take one beer to every need state in this kind of category when our biggest competitors are kind of innovating a new product for every micro moment and micro consumer trend. Like those decisions become incredibly hard and incredibly weighty. But I think the thing I love about brand strategy is as you push through that awkwardness, you do get to a stage where stuff feels like it clicks. And there is just an inherent clarity and logic. You know, you get to the stage where there is no discomfort in the outcome because, yes, there's been some hard decisions along the way, but there's a brilliant logic with kind of absolute clarity and conviction kind of sitting at the heart of the conversation. So I think the process is always challenging. There's always something that you're like, oh my goodness, are we really going to do that? Like, of course, we say we have to sacrifice stuff, but surely not that. You know, surely no one meant, you know, it applied to a situation like this. But you get to the other side of it and there's something incredibly liberating because there's something kind of brilliantly clear and simple in your kind of brand strategy that you exit with.
Yeah. There's a Kanye West song, which I don't know what it's called, but I've written about this in my newsletter, which is like, everything I'm not made me everything I am. And it's like, it's that once you sacrifice, kill the boats or burn the boats, you said you suddenly have this is what this is. Interesting. What else do people get wrong about brand strategy in your opinion?
I think it's also worth talking a bit about how it's a massively creative task in a way.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah, that actually like the role of brand strategy is to have often the most audacious dream for a brand, particularly at early stages and particularly if you're kind of rehabilitating a brand. Like actually brand strategy and that whole kind of process is energized by this kind of audacious kind of brief. You know, when you're a startup and you're kind of looking out into the world and kind of going, oh my God, like wouldn't it be amazing if our brand could be that? Like that audacity and that creativity and that kind of sense of like, yeah, I could imagine a world where people operate in the way that we're kind of talking about. Like there's something massively creative and inventive in that. And as a consequence, like there's a lot of kind of like rigor in brand strategy. Have we ticked all those boxes I've talked about? Do we have a clarity on our audience, clarity on our category, clarity on our story? Yeah, for sure. But actually, we still need the magic of kind of creativity in there, like having a crazy dream for the brand.
But so that's interesting. So there's the crazy dream, but then there's also, because what we were saying at the beginning about, you know what you're saying almost about purpose becoming superfluous in the sense of like these crazy, we don't actually need smaller dreams. Do you know where's the tension there between audacious and small?
Well, I think kind of like Amelia's kind of vision to have a nation and you know, increasingly a world that becomes being obsessed. That's pretty crazy. Like that is a crazy thing for a person and a small kind of founding team ultimately to put on a piece of paper and say that's what we're all about.
Yeah. It's not fantasy land where we're going to solve.
It's incredibly audacious when you think about the category it's played. I think there's just been this chapter where people have just overreached to the point of stuff being unclear. But like there is a kind of like a holy shit moment around that, which is like, are we serious about that? Like, are we really going to put that on a piece of paper and say that's what we're about? Because that's going to feel pretty crazy in some of our dark days that kind of come in those kind of early months and years of a startup. Like, oh my God, we're here to create a world that's been obsessed and I'm kind of worried about X, Y, or Z. Or I'm here to kind of invent a brand new chocolate brand and yet I'm worried about payroll. Like, you know, I do think there is audacity in that. But you know what I think, the reason why I've always loved brand strategy is it's not easily solvable by an algorithm or equation. You know, you can't just kind of go, if this is your audience and this is your category, then this is your kind of brand strategy. There's an art to it, and that art really takes creativity. And so I guess the reason why I kind of bring that up is I would hate people to kind of like hear this and kind of go, great, I've got myself my framework now. I need to just work through this kind of framework. That's why I like to go long form with these conversations, because you can get into the nuance. Yeah.
And so, is there any examples where you've done that framework and then you've the creative magical genius? Because I think that framework creates the rich delta for magic to blossom, but doesn't mean you got to still nurture the land.
100%.
You know, toil away.
Yeah.
Any examples where you've done that process? And then how have you brought it to life?
Well, you know...
It can be in other categories.
Yeah. Well, let's circle back to The Ordinary, which we had kind of done this work on kind of capturing the lightning in a bottle that is The Ordinary.
There's lightning in the bottle.
Yeah, well, I just think The Ordinary is such an incredible brand, has an amazing kind of story around its founding. It's a remarkable brand. But, you know, it was scaling really, really quickly. You needed to get absolutely clear on what that lightning in a bottle was before it became diluted. You know, sometimes these brands kind of have such a strong intuitive sense of themselves, and this is not quite The Ordinary, but you can imagine brands in certain situations that have a bit of a sense of themselves, but don't necessarily kind of advocate so clearly. So they kind of came to us to kind of help bring that clarity and start manifesting it in kind of culture. And so I think some of the stuff that we've done with The Ordinary being super interesting. You know, we hired a retail space in the center of Soho in New York, created this kind of ginormous money pile, kind of about the size of this room, to kind of represent how much extra money we would have to charge consumers if we had a celebrity endorsement. And I think in terms of kind of going like, there's a reason why this brand is so much cheaper than anyone else, and it's got nothing to do with efficacy. It's got everything to do with the marketing strategy. Is like just an example of how we're slowly kind of finding really remarkable ways to tell that story to a wider audience.
That's sick. That like the money is like kind of the the example.
And then another thing we've done with those guys is use the kind of campaign budget to actually buy a set of academic articles, which we've then put on a website, so people can kind of see actually some of the kind of mistruths that they're being sold by the the kind of industry at large. So here are the kind of white papers and the academic papers that prove some of the points that kind of counteract some of the BS of the category. And you start to kind of see how this brand, without the biggest budgets compared to its competitors, is starting to kind of find ways to kind of live its kind of purpose of being a brand that puts primacy on ingredients in a category that's kind of got so much kind of fluff.
Mate, it's so interesting. So once you've got the strategy done, the creative done, on that top of the stream, where does the sort of how do you look at it through a marketing lens? And I know that's like not necessarily your wheelhouse specifically, but then I feel like people get confused with marketing. Is it social media? Like how is it in store?
Great
do you look
question.
at it through different channels?
100%. So, and I'll try and use different terminology because some of the words that relate to that task have been used in this conversation, but they mean very, very different things. You then have to kind of look at the resources different to what we were talking about before of that marketing team. You know, I'm still a really big fan of some level of kind of planning. It could be annual planning, it could be quarterly planning, it could be half-yearly planning, it could be 5-year planning. Yeah. But actually sitting down and kind of saying, well, what resources does the brand and marketing function have for the next thing? And then the framework that I'm a really big fan of is the jobs to be done framework.
Jobs to be done.
Jobs to be done. So as we look over that time period that we're working within, what tasks need to be achieved for this brand to achieve its business goals? You know, again, asterisk, I'm working on an assumption that business has kind of relatively clear goals, but I feel most businesses are pretty good at setting goals for itself.
Goals linked to strategy. Yeah.
Yeah, goal, a goal in terms of revenue or something like that. And then, so you might say, right, we want to grow 33% in the next 12 months. And we know that the brand's kind of ethos and mission is this, but we also know through that where what makes us different in the category, what audience we're pursuing, et cetera, et cetera. And so what jobs need to be done? We might need to raise awareness. We might need to kind of solve a bit of a product barrier that people have, which is people really love the brand, but they're not particularly interested in buying a product like this for X, Y, Z reason. People might love the brand, really want to buy it, but aren't buying it because actually the product isn't visible at shelf, or it's not distributed in the right places, or it's a bit too expensive. You know, you start to kind of get to a series of jobs to be done. And again, my kind of whole practice is really centered on this idea of like focus, sacrifice, having the hard kind of conversations. Can you as an organization get down to 2 or 3 jobs to be done for the year ahead? And when we're working on multi-million-dollar brands, when we look at their annual plans, they tend to have 3 or 4 jobs to be done in the course of a year. And a job to be done is that framework is super important, because once we get those 2, 3, 4 jobs to be done over the course of it, we say to ourselves, any pound that can't be tracked back to one of these jobs to be done, or any minute of kind of human endeavor that can't be tracked to it, was kind of wasted. You know, there's 100 things that this brand could do, and 100 things that it probably wants to do and would be cool to do. Unless we can kind of say why this sponsorship, or why this activation, or why this campaign, or why this in-store activity ties back to one of those jobs to be done, it would be effectively wasted, because we've had the hard conversation about what really matters to the brand.
Yes, okay, so interesting. So you've got the strategy, framework, strategy, creative, this marketing, jobs to be done.
Jobs to be done.
And then from there? And
the thing about putting jobs to be done at the top of your marketing page is it saves you putting other things at the top of the page, which are often channels. Oh, and marketers start to kind of...
Again, I'm not... Because a lot of people listen to this.
Of course. So marketers might conceive of their job as kind of filling certain channels. We have an in-store fixture that we need to be in.
What could be what other channels?
Social, out of home,
social,
Instagram,
out of home,
YouTube content.
Yeah.
TV, if you're kind of so lucky.
Yeah.
Posters, experiential activity, a festival sponsorship, hundreds of things. And
do you think sometimes marketing managers feel like they've got to put something in each one?
I think sometimes when you think of this kind of waterfall of coming up with it, like let's say the brand strategy is clear. This brand is super clear on what it stands for. It's done the hard work. It's got its kind of mission. It doesn't overreach, but it really energizes the organization. It's really powerful in the lives of consumers. Then the conversation starts to sound a little bit like, around this time actually, right, what's the marketing plan for next year? We're trying to grow this business 33%. What's the marketing plan for this year? And sometimes a plan can start off by kind of going, well, in content, we're going to do this. In social, we're going to do this. In our kind of, email, we're going to do this. And we're going to take all our money and out of home, we're going to do this. And so what marketing kind of is imagining itself in that context is a job that's just there to fill in boxes. We're responsible for filling in the social feed. We're responsible for filling in the YouTube content. I'd flip it another way, which is actually, what are the needles that need to move over the next 12 months that we really, really care about? Is it a brand health issue? Not enough people know about us, or people think we're too expensive, or people don't know how to use us. Is it a more of a consideration issue, which is love you, but I don't know how to use you. I don't know when I would use you. I've heard about the product a lot, but I don't know if it's a morning thing, a dessert thing. I don't know. Or is it a bit downstream, like, oh yeah, I keep meaning to buy you, but I never think about you when I'm in the store. Or you were just slightly more expensive than this brand that's always on promotion. Or I didn't even realize you were on that supermarket. I can never find you. Or I do my shop in Tesco and you're only available. You can start to kind of imagine some of the problems that a brand has. It has to kind of ask itself a tough question of like, hey, there's only this team, there's only this much budget. Which of these really matter to us? Because we're probably not going to be able to achieve them all if we have hundreds. We probably need to get down to that set or two or three. Yeah. And then when you get there, you can start to kind of go, okay, cool. Now let's bring in a conversation about some of those resources, the channels that we have, the money that we have, and start putting them against each bucket. Because different channels do different jobs. That's the kind of amazing thing about it. So, the way you use social is probably better at certain things than it is other things. So I think just kind of starting with jobs to be done and really kind of going, what are the kind of big
also,
pressing problems we're going to solve?
And that's when you can do stuff that, as linking this back to bold beans, I remember Amelia saying, loads of people said to her, like, don't launch a cookbook. You can start to linking that back to the contrarian things. Everyone's like, oh, it's, brand aside, fucking, there's a lot of wanky terminology, brand quakes, brands aside. But like, and actually that is a really important bucket for her because that.
Yeah, but let's talk about how that would look in this framework. It wouldn't start by kind of saying, we need to do a cookbook this year, so that's one of the things on the marketing plan. It would start by saying, we need to kind of actually establish our foodie credentials. That's what's going to set us apart in this country. We're competing with some brands that have kind of amazing European origin stories. We're competing with some cheaper things that are lower quality. It's foodie credentials that are going to do it. So job to be done, number one, is establish our foodie credentials.
What other jobs to be done?
Well, they might have had another job to be done of kind of grow awareness of the brand. We need more people to hear about us. And they might have had another thing, which is to kind of get more people buying it, that would feel like kind of a solid kind of shape of a marketing plan for the last couple of years for kind of Bold Bean. And then underneath that, you can start being really innovative with tactics. Okay, how do we have foodie credentials? We could have a poster that says, we love food, costs tons of money, it's up for a couple of weeks. So uncreative, it's not really going to do it. Or we could start a cookbook and actually have a cookbook that's kind of so unique that it opens up this whole new kind of conversation. Food podcasts want to talk to us. Food festivals want to talk to us. We can start sharing the content online and start kind of showing, hey, we have a point of view on how you can, the creative potential of this kind of product. That was a really creative solve to the job to be done that they had, which is to create foodie credentials.
One thing I asked Al Barrett from Grenade is, like in the gym, like you got compound exercises. So your bench press, your deadlift, your shoulder press, just the big fuckers that move the needle. And then you've got the superfluous exercise that people think are important, like, I don't know, you've seen them in the gym as like people's got a band that they've sort of connected to their whatever, and it's kind of like they're spending it and it's just superfluous. Doesn't move the needle. What would you say are the big compound things that move the needle for brands? And then what are things that you think most marketeers get wrong, which is basically, doing jumping on a Bosu ball or whatever?
So look, I think some of the fundamentals are, recognize the value of kind of meaning, first and foremost. Like, can you argue what role this brand serves in modern life and in your consumer's life? Wrestling with that job of why the fuck this brand exists is a really tough question for brands to answer. And hopefully I've made the kind of case today that we need to not overreach for that, but actually really ground it in that. So one would be meaning. The second would be fame. It's like, how the hell are we going to get people to talk and remark upon this brand? And that might be by kind of jumping into kind of areas where there's immediately heat, either a kind of conversation topic or some of those kind of areas that we've talked about, like the Dragon's Dens of this world. But the brand that grow do so because they're famed. People are talking about them. And then I think underneath all of that is just this kind of recognition that to get there, the brand's going to need to sacrifice and commit. It's going to have to leave a lot of stuff behind that maybe was kind of interesting, and kind of recognize that what signing up for isn't a 6 or 12 months kind of thing. It's a kind of multi-year journey.
Stephen King's got a great book called On Writing. It's kind of completely different category, but talk all about how you should write a great novel. And he's got a thing called Kill Your Babies. So it's that piece of prose that you love.
Okay.
And as in, it's a piece of prose that you absolutely love. Yep. You're like, oh my God, that's amazing. But it's like, does it add to the story?
100%.
Cut it.
Yeah.
Cut it. Brilliant. We're going to wrap this up in a sec. What are some of the superfluous things that most marketers think are important but are just not?
Well, look, I think in the absence of having a really clear brand strategy or a clear jobs to be done framework, probably a lot of stuff. Because actually, you know, particularly if you're a senior marketer, if you're doing singular tactics without clarity on what they add up to, it's really hard, no matter how good it is, to say it's really, really useful. Because if you do something amazing day one that positions the brand in a certain way for a certain audience, and then the next thing you follow up with is talking about the brand in a completely different way for a completely different audience, those two things might be amazing. And you and I might sit here and go, fuck, that was cool when they did that. But actually, unless they're kind of connected by this coherent strategy, they all kind of become a bit useless. So it's the kind of strategy and that kind of long-term commitment and clarity that gives anything kind of power.
Interesting. And then finally, just what are some real books that have really changed the way you've seen the world?
Yeah, Good Strategy, Bad Strategy, which is a phenomenal book on not just marketing strategy, but the kind of discipline of strategy. It's where that kind of idea of like actually strategy being really rooted in sacrifice is based. You know, secondly, I really love the idea we're talking about where good ideas come from. You know, if we're going to sit with a blank sheet of paper and talk about inventing what the brand's about, it's really helpful to understand what some of the mechanics are about. And then lastly, you know, talking about the fact that like actually so much brand strategy is rooted in understanding the world. Like I find so much, I just like kind of journalism. You know, I'm such a massive fan of it, whether it's Financial Times, whether it's Puck, whether it's Atlantic, Economist. You know, the stuff we're talking about that kind of goes, oh, right, okay, I can see why Grenade was successful. There is this real tension between, you know, gym bro culture and a desire to kind of have some treats. Yeah, I kind of see that. I think that, you know, what you can kind of pick up from like articles and news and what journalists are creating is just so powerful.
The final thing is, because I just want to to wrap up this culture piece, because I think everything you said today is insane. I think the hardest thing for people to maybe grapple with, and I think, you know, some things, just because you've got a framework doesn't mean it's fucking easy. Like there's a real art to the culture piece and the tension piece. Is there any like questions that can maybe reveal tensions that people can ask themselves? Because, you know, I think often one of the mistakes people starting new brands is they just go and look at the supermarket shelf and they think they're going to be able to find some cultural tension there, or they're going to. And then that's why you have the blandemic, which is when every brand looks the fucking
100%.
same. Like, what's the art of that?
Yeah. So look, you know, to take one step back, you know, there's this kind of statistic that I'm always drawn to, which is 75% of brands could disappear tomorrow and no one would care. You know,
who came up with that?
This kind of piece of research by a company called Havas.
Oh, right.
It's an amazing kind of thing, which is like actually 75% of brands in the supermarket could disappear and no one would really care.
Wow.
And there's another thing, which is like we probably as you know, in the West have reached peak stuff. You know, that's a quote from Archaeology, head of sustainability.
Peak stuff.
Peak stuff. Like we're not really looking at our lives and saying we're missing kind of something. So actually the white space is in new relationships for stuff. So I think we have to kind of first and foremost kind of call that there is a crisis in brand building at the moment. There is, you know, the way we're approaching brand building isn't really, really working. We need to think a bit differently. The historical way of coming up with a brand was positioning. Okay, go look at that supermarket shelf that you're about to enter. What makes your brand slightly better? You've got less sugar, you've got more taste, you've got more flavor. Nowadays, in a world where 75% of brands could disappear and we probably don't need any more products, that's not really going to cut it. So actually you have to look at the life of your consumer, that person who kind of creates a reason for this brand to exist, and say, what in their life are we going to fix? What problem or kind of thing are they wrestling with that we're going to fix? And that might sound really audacious. And you kind of go, I'm just trying to make a super brand, man. Like, what the hell? But I think if you really peer into the lives of people, like they're incredibly complex. People are kind of dealing with a whole mix of stuff. And I think just kind of sitting with kind of real people, you will find it. Like I think, look, the other thing is the best founders, I think, are incredibly consumer-centric. And I think for some people, this will click. They're just going to go, yeah, of course. Like, actually, the whole reason why I created this product in the first place, not because I was inspired by the shelf, I was inspired by a person. Like, Grenade didn't come out of looking at the chocolate bar aisle and kind of go, oh, I can think of something else.
It
came from sitting in the gym.
Yes.
And so,
yes,
or kind of looking at kind of matcha and kind of going, fuck, I'd probably drink a lot more matcha if it wasn't so hard. Like most of the best brands are kind of invented at this moment of great empathy and great understanding. And so I'd kind of encourage people to look back to that moment. I think it's really unlikely that there's a lot of listeners who came up with their brand looking at a spreadsheet. Oh, that's a category that's growing and I think I could do something in there and I don't really care about the people that would buy it, but I reckon I could make money there. I think it's an incredibly small percentage of entrepreneurs. I think most entrepreneurs are kind of living with something going, God, that's fucking annoying. I reckon other people see the world that way.
Yes.
And we kind of walk past that and we kind of go, oh my God, now what's that name? What's the logo going to look like? Where's it going to be stocked? It's like, actually, there's something hugely powerful in that initial moment.
Looking inwards.
When you had that frustration that said, fuck, who's going to we need to solve this. Like, there's something incredibly powerful in that moment. And I think that's the thing to kind of mine. And I think a lot of people have had that experience. Maybe we've just ignored it and not recognized just how powerful it can be. Because when you're kind of communicating with people, I'd so much rather have a conversation around what we're going to change in their life and the problem we're going to fix than talk to them about how great the name is or how great the logo is.
I think interesting is I think founders have that initially, but sometimes you get more investors on board or more kind of the process-driven stuff. They move away from that.
100%.
And I think part of today, as much all the goals you've laid down, mate, is just go. So ultimately, it's an inside job. Love that, brother. Thank you so much.
Thank you, man.
That was an absolute joy. Yeah, that was so sick, man.
No, thank you.
Hey guys, thank you so much for watching this video. Hope you were loving the episode. I'd appreciate a really small yet significant favor, por favor. Please may you click the subscribe button, get in the comments, tell me what you think about the episode, tell me what you think we did on the show. It may not seem much, but it really helps us grow and helps us get bigger guests. Thank you so much.